Welcome to the meeting of the Benton County Planning Commission, and we are here tonight to do deliberation on the application for the expansion of the Coffin Butte. That is, we'll work on mics here. Thank you. If you give me hand signals, I'll follow. First in order is we will call the roll, and you're going to.
Yeah, I will take that on this evening. Thank you. Chair Fowler will be calling in this evening. Slightly delayed. Okay. Vice Chair Heyman.
Present.
Commissioner Wilson.
Present.
Commissioner Lee. Present. Commissioner Cash is absent. Commissioner Bisco.
Present.
Commissioner Struthers.
Here.
Commissioner Fulfer.
Here.
We do have quorum.
For the record, we do have a quorum, and we will proceed with the meeting at this point. And please, when other commissioners join us, please let all of us know.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have, as you may be familiar, a number of legal things that I read to you, and they are important. They may feel laborious, but I want to make sure that we're aware of them. Okay. This is a time and a place for the continued public hearing in the matter of LU 24027. The subject of this continued public hearing is an application for a conditional use permit to expand an existing landfill. This is a continuation of a quasi-judicial hearing previously held on April 29th, May 1st, May 6th, May 8th, July 8th, and July 9th. And it will be conducted pursuant of Benton County Development Code sections 51.705 through 51.725. The purpose of this continued hearing is for the Planning Commission to deliberate and reach a decision on the application. In a quasi-judicial proceeding such as this, it is the Commission's duty to apply the law, not revise it. The Commission must determine whether the applicant has met all of the applicable criteria in Benton County Code. The June 26, 2025 staff reports lists and sets out each of the applicable criteria. DEQ regulations and other state and federal laws and regulations are not applicable to the approval criteria. It is the applicant's obligation to produce the evidence necessary to show that the applicable criteria in the BCC are satisfied or can be satisfied through conditions of approval, and to provide written analysis explaining why the evidence demonstrates that the criteria are satisfied. Tonight, we must determine whether or not the applicant has satisfied its burden of proof to establish the criteria in the BCC that the BCC are met. We must determine whether a preponderance of the evidence supports a conclusion that the applicable criteria are met. A preponderance of the evidence means evidence which is of greater weight or more convincing than the evidence which is offered in opposition to it. The Commission will consider the testimony presented over the 6 days of the public hearing on the application, as well as the written record as presented on the county's mini docs website. All of the written evidence, argument, and testimony that comprises the record is posted at the county's mini docs platform. Several written submissions were received by the county during the response open period between July 9th and July 16th at 5 p.m. In addition, the applicant also submitted its final written argument on Monday, July 21st. During the deliberations, the planning commissioners may ask staff questions regarding procedure or ask staff to locate record citation pages for items already in the record. No new evidence may be presented during these deliberations. In reaching our decision, we may only consider evidence, argument, or testimony that is already in the record. We may not consider evidence, argument, or testimony that is not in the record, including personal knowledge or expertise in any given area, if that information is not also available in the record. In addition, evidence that is completely unrelated to the approval or criteria is not relevant evidence. It is our job to evaluate credibility and reliability of the evidence and how much weight to assign to that evidence. It is important that the Planning Commission's decision-making be free of bias. Bias occurs when decision makers have preconceived opinions of the case that they are unable to set aside, preventing them from making an objective decision based on the evidence and the arguments in the record. While living in proximity or having other background relating to the project are not disqualifying per se, any additional information obtained outside of the hearing may not be considered, nor may it influence our decision. Each of us must put aside our preconceived perspectives, make a decision based solely on the evidence included in the record as it applies standards and the criteria in Benton County Code. If you as an individual commissioner cannot, you should not participate in this process. Members of the public who are present at this hearing, the Planning Commission's request that you be respectful and courteous of the commission and the staff present. Commenting during the Planning Commission's deliberations or interrupting the Planning Commission while they are deliberating to reach a decision is not respectful or courteous. The chair reserves the right to remove anyone who does not abide by this directive or who engages in this disruptive or discourteous behavior. The matter is now returned to the table for deliberations and decision. Chair Fowler, are you available?
Done.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
how's the audio? Is it all right?
yes, we're fine. Thanks, Chair Fowler. I believe you
Well,
would.
yes, thank you for the time, and I apologize for the disembodied voice coming from the ceiling. But I very much appreciate the applicant has not only worked with the county in preparation of their application, but has clearly analyzed the feedback from 2021, fully participated in Benton County Talks Trash, and fully participated in this Planning Commission process. That the net result is a much more deeply researched, higher quality and prepared application. This really is an example of how the process should work in conditional use permitting. If ever I forget that we are a community of engaged, passionate, and intelligent citizens, this process has been a vivid reminder. Public testimony has been both respectful and enlightening. It has certainly been worth the time that we've devoted listening to all of it. And I'd especially like to commend Ms. Sheets and her cadre of experts for a professionally analyzed, researched, and written staff report. To say that this has been a long process and it's created a voluminous record is an understatement. Like all of you, I've diligently listened to and read every word in the record. My comments, which are going to follow here, are based on my understanding of that record, and if I'm in any way mistaken, I'm happy to be corrected. In the interest of time, I won't dwell on the many areas that I agree that the applicant and staff assessments of compliance with the standards, only to say that I concur that the application largely meets the code criteria, and as we are frequently reminded, compliance with code is our only decision standard. But all of the conditions and criteria must be met. My statement will therefore only focus on my concerns and difficulties. If my colleagues can determine conditions of approval to sufficiently ameliorate these concerns and those conditions have a reasonable chance of succeeding, I can support an approval with conditions. Otherwise, I must vote to deny. I'm very much looking forward to all of the comments from all of the commissioners. Despite Coffin Butte designated as a regional landfill in 1974 And even though Code Section 77 was written in 1983, there is no discrimination in the code between a landfill and a regional landfill. Staff asserts that this distinction will be added in the next revision of code. For context, in 1977, annual tonnage was less than 100,000. As we know, current annual tonnage is 1.1 million, a tenfold increase. So we have a Section 77 of Benton County Code that does not discriminate, contemplate, or anticipate an operation of the scope or complexity of this application. So I frankly didn't find Section 77 very helpful in review of the application. 77 does offer the general requirement that proposals for expansion require a conditional use permit governed by Section 53. And I believe it is here that our deliberations will focus. Section 53 of the code explains that the conditional use may have an adverse effect on the surrounding permitted uses in a code and recognizes that conditional use approvals are not impact-free. 53.215 provides us with guidelines to evaluate rather than strict standards, and it's our judgment as a planning commission whether those impacts are reasonably mitigated. The county appears to accept the applicant's assertion that their current operations are to be considered in the baseline for evaluating whether the proposal seriously interferes with uses to adjacent property as well as the character of the area. I both agree and disagree. The landfill has been in operations for more than 50 years, so as to be accepted within the character of the area. I do accept and agree that a landfill is a component of the character of the area. However, I do not believe that the current tempo of operations was anticipated or reviewed as a land use action and by extension, the public. The record shows that conditional use permits for ancillary activities of power generation, stockpiling, transfers, and so forth, with the last conditions of approval in 2015 for stormwater treatment. This was the last test of BCC 53.215, but at an operating tempo of less than half of today and half of what is proposed going forward. I readily accept that the landfill is a part of the character of the area, but I do not accept that all of the current impacts, especially those correlated to the tempo of operations, must be considered as baseline and therefore grandfathered in. It's no wonder that monitoring and enforcement of these previous conditions of approval cannot objectively be assessed, and why BCTT had such a challenge coming up with a consensus on whether the conditions of approval in previous actions had been successfully made. They are decades old and established under previous operators and ownership. By one conceptual description, this application simply extends the current operations for approximately 6 years. And that is an easy way to think about this application, especially as the applicant asserts that the tempo will be approximately consistent to today and has committed to this maximum value going forward for our assessment of adverse impact. But evidence shows that for the 6-year extension of life, 3 to 4 years of preparatory work of 6 to 8 months each year of blasting, overburden removal, trucking operations, etc., on top of existing operations. Therefore, the concept of an extension of landfill life is a little too simple in my mind and ignores the very significant impact of preparation and development for that extension. A decision to approve should be based on findings that 53.215 subsection 1, proposed use does not seriously interfere with uses on adjacent property, with the character of the area, or the purpose of the zone. We are all customers of Republic Services and users of Coffin Butte, either directly or indirectly. We discard our refuse into the trash can and it magically disappears, out of sight and out of mind. Potential negative externalities of odor, unsightliness, traffic, and risk of groundwater contamination are inescapable, yet for the most history of Coffin Butte, operations affected only a handful of properties. Both the landfill and Adair Village have grown rapidly. Landfill operations have grown from roughly 500,000 tons in 2017 to over 1 million annual tons, while Adair Village has grown from a tiny hamlet to nearly 1,000 homes, and no sign of slowing down. We are on a collision course. Conflict is not only inevitable, but upon us. We have the challenge of balancing the expansion desires of the landfill owners with those of surrounding agricultural and forest resource lands, and with the growing numbers of homeowners having the right to peaceful enjoyment of their property in residential zones. I am particularly moved by the adjacent neighbor testimony indicating blasting is causing stress on livestock and impacting their livelihood. On top of existing operational noise, the expansion will have 3 to 4 years of 6 to 8 months per year of major earth moving in advance of operation. Anyone with pets knows that the 4th of July can empathize with what this particular landowner is experiencing and sees the impact from development noise. Blowing debris may also threaten livestock. These are serious interferences, not nuisances. Fencing may, but is not guaranteed to address the ingestion risk to livestock. I do not see how the existing proposed conditions of approval sufficiently mitigate the impact of noise on both the agricultural and residential zones. We have appropriately spent a great deal of time on the impact of odor. The applicant offers a model with a self-disclosed general challenge, as well as inherent limitation owing to the topography and microclimate of the area. As a model, it suggests that odor can be controlled to nuisance levels or below. On the other hand, substantial public input contradicts the model and shows that odor limits their activity, use of their property, and seriously interferes with residents' peaceful enjoyment of their properties. We could dismiss public testimony as anecdotal, or we could accept as citizen science. This contradiction has not yet been reconciled in my mind. As the model has not been verified with empirical results and not squared with a body of public testimony, I very much struggle with the proposed conditions. It's not obvious to me that the proposed conditions in the record demonstrates that odor will be limited to nuisance levels or below. 53215, subsection 2, the proposed use does not impose an undue burden on public improvements, facilities, utilities, or services available to the area. Here I have an issue with water quality as a potential undue burden. PFAS is an emerging issue that we must consider in protection of our water quality. Coffin Butte leachate is processed at the Corvallis Municipal Water Treatment Center that expels into the Willamette River, a source of drinking water for many downstream communities, and we have no evidence that in the record that such treatment mitigates PFAS. Does the treatment of PFAS represent an undue burden on facilities? The proposed conditions I do not see mitigating PFAS. The natural surface drainage for Coffin Butte is Callaway Creek, which also flows into the Willamette. Wash-off, aerosol deposits, storm overflows migrate to the Willamette. Submitted evidence indicates that there is no safe level of PFAS, and I do not see sufficient conditions of approval around those risks of PFAS to our watersheds. Finally, I'm very concerned about the necessary monitoring of noise, odor, and water, and the proposed conditions of approval may not be adequately funded by the county, state, and federal regulators. History of current operations has demonstrated that there are, in fact, exceedances in each area. Unless the county and regulatory authorities can fund regular monitoring and have enforcement resources, I have low confidence that the proposed 80 or something conditions of approval will actually achieve mitigation of the risks. The risks to land quality, water, air quality, and even public health are too great not to monitor regularly and have the capacity for enforcement. I do very much appreciate that the applicant has offered to fund resources within the county for monitoring as a condition of approval, and wonder, though, whether it goes far enough. Evidence in the record indicates that state and federal regulators neither have the resources or expertise to effectively monitor the landfill. We have heard explicitly from the county that they do not have those resources either, but again, with the condition of approval proposed by the applicant, that may be less of an issue. Therefore, it appears to me, though, that there could be an undue burden on public facilities. So those are my concerns, and I look forward to all of your conclusions. Again, if my colleagues can determine conditions of approval to sufficiently ameliorate my concerns and those conditions have a reasonable chance of succeeding, I can support an approval with conditions. Otherwise, I must vote for denial. I very much look forward to our discussions and return it to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Fowler. It is our practice to provide an opportunity for each one of us to enter a sort of open summarizing statement. We are not required to do that, but I want to provide that opportunity. And typically, the chair does it first, and I will do it second. So, and then I'll give each one of you an opportunity. First, I'd like to thank everyone who's been a part of this process. The people who provided testimony, lots of input, the staff, very much so. I'm going to admit that I lack the professional capacity to test the veracity of every statement. And I have relied heavily on staff's analysis in looking at that information. And in reading the comments, the testimony, it is impossible not to conclude that this is a terribly important matter to us and should be treated as a terribly important matter. And I want to let you know that I feel the importance of that. Also note that often in our conversation, in our record, we address a range of bigger questions than just this proposal. We look at, well, the conditions that are associated with landfills in general, questions about whether this is the best place for a landfill, questions about garbage itself, you know, and I want to tell you that those all feel like incredibly important questions to me. There are questions that I would love to have conversation about. And I also believe that that isn't the question that we're answering here tonight. The question that I have been asked to answer for myself is whether or not the application, inclusive of whatever variety of conditions might be applied to that, meet the criteria as laid forth in Benton County Code. I'm not absolutely certain of my answer at this point. I'm very interested in hearing the opinions and the inputs and the observations and the interpretations of my fellow commissioners. I probably lean in favor of approval at this point, but I am very amenable to the conversation that we have. But I think as Chair Fowler has already done, I think it's helpful for us to get a sense of, these are not votes at this point, but it's helpful to our conversations, to our deliberations, to have a sense of where we are when we enter into that process. So I want to share that with you. That is mine, not nearly as detailed or technical as Chair Fowler's, but that is where I am at this moment. I would like to provide an opportunity for either's. Again, you do not have to do this, okay? So I'll first call on Commissioner Lee.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. So
You're welcome.
I did a lot of preparation and I have a lot to say. First of all, I will really appreciate the comments that came before me, and I won't say them again, but I agree with everything that has been said to this point. So I have a written statement, if you don't mind, if I mostly sort of read it or use it. I can provide it to the staff afterwards if they want it. My statement provides what I consider findings from this hearing that relate to this application and the land use criteria, and that support my opposition to this application. So 53.2151, I want to talk about groundwater. This is kind of deep in the weeds, but it's very important to me and to others. So the applicant is required to meet the burden of proof that groundwater interference would not seriously interfere with uses on adjacent property. But the applicant has not met the burden of proof in these ways. First of all, their analysis appears to be based on untested assumptions. It's stated that the application provides groundwater analysis based on evidence from the north side of Coffin Butte Road. According to Exhibit 16, the consultant, I don't know how to say it, Tuppen, provided a substantial historical record for the north end of Coffin Butte Road and said that for the development of area south of the road, reports are in preparation. Additional data is forthcoming. Our present understanding of the area will be available in the near future. That leaves us without clear information that describes the impact of groundwater on the south side of Coffin Butte Road. The applicant's analysis goes further and provides a couple of assumptions that appear to me to be in conflict. Tuppen says that well waters, domestic wells in this area produce their water, especially from fractured rock basalt. Predicting where and at what depth the fracture will produce water for a domestic well is problematic. This is because the lateral and vertical geometry of the fractures in the bedrock is not uniform. Then the staff report, the applicant response to groundwater concerns state that Valley Landfill's evaluation to the local water supply considers the relative consistency of the groundwater flow conditions to support a conservative assumption that fractured bedrock behaves similarly to a porous medium. Under this assumption, all fractures are interconnected, allowing the analytical solution to evaluate the most widespread effect of the proposed project. In other words, they have a mathematical model and they want to plug something into it. So they did a kind of generalization, but that generalization is in direct conflict with the statement that bedrock basalt flows are not uniform. They are not uniform and they are not all interconnected. So the applicant has also failed to consider I've never heard the word dewatering before, but dewatering impacts from excavations during construction, especially for the leachate ponds on the forest conservation lands near Tampico Ridge. And so what this says to me is they expect to excavate that basalt flow, and they expect that they're just going to interrupt a bunch of completely uniform and interconnected fractures, whereas the Tuppen report says, no, they're random, they're unpredictable. So one of the impacts of that excavation of that basalt face is that if it interrupts a fracture that holds a lot of water, where's that water going to go? It's going to fall downward, it's going to fall down slope, but there doesn't seem to have been any consideration in the application of what will happen to that water, how they will deal with it, how much it would be, what the impact would be. So what would happen, what could happen, what they don't know for sure will or will not happen is if they cut that basalt face, they interrupt a fracture that reaches toward a residential well, and they dewater that well, that destroys that well permanently. So if the applicant's assumptions about the nature of fractured bedrock are incorrect, dewatering will have taken place by the time monitoring shows it. This is permanent and irreversible. And if this were to happen, operating, what's OP 13A1 is inadequate to prevent serious interference and proposes unknown mitigation after the fact. Operating, what is it, OP? What's P stand for? Policy procedure 13A1 proposes that the adjacent property owners then would have to prove that their water loss was due to the expansion and not due to climate or other factors. But without baseline data, it might be impossible to satisfy the applicant. Doesn't say who's going to adjudicate that. Nor does the condition of approval provide any thresholds to use as an acceptable measure of proof one way or the other. Nor do have they made any effort to gather baseline data to use for comparison of before and after construction, even though they have had the time. After all, we've been out this since at least 2020, and they have adjacent land and they had the resources to take baseline groundwater level data. The application's mitigation plan in OP 13 doesn't specify a frequency of monitoring other than regular, nor does it specify how it will determine the baseline established prior to excavation, since the wells or monitoring wells won't be installed until after the excavation. These absences make the conditions of approval essentially unenforceable as a mitigation measure. So risks from dewatering are permanent and irreversible. The applicant has not met the burden of proof that it can mitigate the serious interference with adjacent property. So groundwater contamination from leachate seriously interferes with uses on adjacent properties and the character of the area. The landfill expansion would increase its rainwater footprint by about 45% and increase its leachate generation proportionately. But at this moment, the applicant has no long-term plan for the treatment of leachate. If they do not find a treatment facility in a timely manner, a number of potential scenarios demonstrate risks that have not been dealt with by the applicant. Leachate storage ponds could fill and remain filled for long periods. If that happened at a time when there's a significant rainfall event, leachate could enter the groundwater in very large amounts that could not be mediated by their system. Similarly, if there were a fire event on the steep flanks of the landfill, either the new cell or the existing cells, large amounts of water might be necessary to douse the fire, and leachate would significantly increase. And if the storage ponds were already full because the applicant did not have a place to put it, again, the leachate could spill and enter the groundwater. There doesn't seem to be an adequate plan for these scenarios or these potentials. So there's evidence of toxic impacts to groundwater associated with landfills in general. And it's clear from testimony, leachate leaks from torn liners or storm waters pose a serious and long-term impact on adjacent property and the character of the area. I should have said potential impacts. So OP 13B proposes to mitigate the risks by monitoring arsenic in sentinel wells, but this condition of approval is inadequate for the following reasons. The condition of approval does not specify how changes in arsenic will be attributed to landfill operations versus other factors. The presence or absence of arsenic has been a source of conflicting interpretations, and other contaminants from leachate are that more certainly come from the landfill should be used instead of arsenic. OP 13 says the sampling program will begin before landfill construction. This activity should be moved to become a preliminary condition of approval. The applicant does not specify how it will determine a baseline prior to excavation. Is it based on one sample, based on several seasonal samples? What's the threshold for acceptable sampling error? Who's going to determine the baseline? The applicant, the county, DEQ? The condition of approval is so vague, as written, it would be entirely unenforceable. The burden of proof has not been met. So water and fire have always been my favorite topics, as it were. Fire and wildfire risks at Coffin Butte Landfill and the seriously interfere with uses on adjacent property, the character of the area, and provide an undue burden. And the expansion would expand the risk proportionately. So I agree with the Adair Fire Department that to recommend denial of this application because it provides an undue burden and interferes with uses on adjacent property and the character of the area. Whether a fire started at the landfill or a fire that was impacting the region, any fire that included Coffin Butte landfill footprint would seriously impact adjacent uses and the character of the area, and it would be an undue burden on local services. I feel concerned that Benton County and the applicant do not seriously consider and plan for the risks associated with fire at Coffin Butte landfill, risks that the expansion will enlarge proportionately. I agree with Adair Fire Department that the applicant has not met the burden of proof that their mitigation is effective. The reasons are as follows. We have evidence that management underreports fire events and confuses information using generalizations about types of fire. Equipment fires were described as commonplace and either under or unreported. Impacts from the smoke from those fires has not been considered as an impact at all. First responders report feeling ill after working on fires at the landfill. Methane and other volatile organics leak in plumes that reach explosive levels from the existing site and have done so for years. Coffin Butte or Republic Services is asking DEQ for a permit to increase the methane level that they emit, even though the super emitter episodes have not been resolved or proven to halt. After hours fires are reported by neighbors and drivers on the highway, not Coffin Butte staff. Adair Fire Chief suggests that public service management team meet regularly to review fire risks at the site, but testimony suggested that they have not done so. The Community Wildfire Protection Plan specifically excludes consideration and planning for wildfire at Coffin Butte landfill. The applicant's analysis underestimated the risk and excluded sources of risk such as windblown embers from an off-site fire, which have proven to be the most serious consideration from the recent 2020 fires, from all the recent experience in Oregon of fires. It's that those windblown embers that provide a huge and serious risk, and that is not included in the applicant's fire analysis. Fire at the working face is considered to be a major source of risk, yet the expansion specifies an enlarged working face from 1/2 acre to 2 acres with no analysis that I could see on that impact to fire risk. A fire at Coffin Butte last year caused adjacent properties to evacuate themselves and their livestock. We already see that Oregon is in a state of emergency due to wildfire this summer. Regular weather conditions that increase risk include high winds and corresponding drops in humidity below 20%. Any local vegetation fire could produce a sustained barrage of wind-blown embers that reach the landfill when Adair and other local responders are already at that source. Monmouth had a fire just this past weekend north of Coffin Butte, and the wind was from the west and the northwest.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, I just want to caution you to stay what's in the record.
Okay, oh, sorry.
Okay.
If embers met an explosive methane or volatile organic compound leak or some garbage at an open workface, the result could be catastrophic. The applicant's fire mitigation plan fails to include this scenario. While firefighters responding to requests for mutual aid would not have personal protection equipment that would be appropriate for use at a landfill. OP 12 relies on reporting to DSAC. DSAC does not exist. Reporting is not a substitute for mitigation of the hazard. Coffin Butte landfill expansion would cause fire risk to expand, and the risk is not mitigated by an adequate plan. The result is an undue burden on public improvements. I could go on. I have a lot more of stuff about the risks due to fire, the possible scenarios. I'll move on if you would like me to. Okay.
Just a reminder again, these are our opening comments, and I think we're well into our deliberative process here.
It was difficult for me to
separate them.
Yes. If you'd like me to be briefer, I will, but I'm just gonna have to go through it. I'm just gonna have to go through it again.
Yeah, I think it's important for you to make your points.
Okay.
Again, I think I appreciate the reminder that we very explicitly stick to information from the record, not draw informational expertise or other information. So
yes. So I'm going to skip this one because it's a little bit. I'll just leave it for last. So odor seriously interferes with uses on adjacent properties and the character of the area. We have ample evidence of this. OP7 does not mitigate the harm. It is so vague, it is unenforceable. It provides no thresholds for success or for failure. It relies on attempts to find the source where possible. It provides no time limits for response. Its monitoring is unrealistic and ineffective. It relies on reporting. Reporting is not a substitute for mitigation of the harm. Noise seriously interferes with uses on adjacent property and the character of the area. The applicant stated, typically construction activity to the site of a proposed use is not considered part of the impact for a conditional use review. I believe I have the option to disagree with this. Noise levels at the existing operation are already causing concerns, but the applicant proposes is blasting another construction noise to take place over the span of 3 or 4 years on top of the noise levels already causing complaint. OP2 is intended to mitigate noise, but only after commercial operation begins, and specifically not during the construction phase. This is not an adequate response to interference with uses on adjacent property and the character of the area. Again, OP2 relies on reporting the noise. Enforcement of this condition of approval might result in a lot of reports, but where's the mitigation? Litter from Coffin Butte landfill expansion seriously interferes with uses on adjacent property. The litter from the expansion may increase due to the increased transport of trash back and forth across Coffin Butte Road. The applicant acknowledges the serious interference of litter and specifically addresses it in the conditions of approval. Litter on the roadside degrades the environment and visual impact and seriously interferes with the character of the area. Litter on adjacent properties is well documented to cause hazards to livestock and other uses on adjacent property. We heard testimony that PFAS contaminates landfill dust as well as water. We have testimony that the cancer cluster, which was reported in Soap Creek Valley at the 2021 hearings, has grown in number since then. OP15 relies heavily on fencing to mitigate litter with no consideration of the airborne litter particle size or the airborne litter toxicity. The applicant provides no evidence that fencing will work to prevent litter of any size or any characteristic. OP15 specifies additional litter patrols. Litter patrols and cleanup do not specify the particle size being handled by the patrols, their timing, and they provide no thresholds for success or for failure. The applicant has not met the burden of proof that the expansion will not seriously interfere with uses on adjacent property or the character of the area. Coffin Butte Landfill expansion impacts the character of the area relating to housing. The Planning Commission is required to view this expansion in consideration of its long-term impacts. Benton County has made housing a priority, but has no housing plan. Benton County expects to revise its comprehensive plan to address housing on rural land and includes consideration of Coffin Butte Landfill in those future considerations. Coffin Butte Landfill is expanding southward while Adair Village is attempting to expand its housing potential. Coffin Butte Landfill expansion impacts housing growth potential for the area due to at least the noise, odor, litter, and general industrial character. The applicant has failed to consider this impact related to the character of the area. Development in wetlands. Coffin Butte expansion is cited on wetlands. The EPA specifically advises against siting landfills in or near wetlands. P11 proposes wetland mitigation on tax lot 1200. But Palestrine emergent wetland and Palestrine forested wetlands also appear on tax lot 1107 and 1108. But the applicant does not make clear their proposal to mitigate impacts to wetlands on those tax lots. Coffin Butte expansion will seriously interfere with the purpose of the zone, which is forest conservation zone. Construction and operation conditions on the FC zone result in changes in grazing habitat and the migration corridor used by a variety of wildlife species. The applicant proposes use of fencing around the expansion with no evidence of its impact on wildlife. The Great Blue Heron analysis relies on the assumption that the birds habituate to noise. P323 states that the applicant will identify a buffer of 300 feet, but does not specify if it's surrounding the sensitive area or in a specific direction. The condition of approval includes no mitigation for great blue herons during the operation of the landfill. At least I didn't see it. The application only addresses great blue heron concerns. Either that condition should be expanded to include other wildlife or additional conditions should be added. Testimony from the public identified numerous other potential wildlife impacts. The applicant has not met the burden of proof that the proposal will not interfere with the purpose of the forest conservation zone for protection of wildlife resources. again, geotechnical data from the staff report, page 60. The applicant geotechnical consultant says, we conclude that the existing geotechnical data and analysis Exhibit 5 do not indicate that there are any geotechnical or geologic constraints that would adversely impact landfill development. We note that additional geotechnical evaluation related to the design will be provided before landfill construction. That leaves us out of being able to look at it or evaluate it. Chapter 77.310(1)C requires provisions for screening of the site from public roads and adjacent property. Their proposal is inadequate for screening from public roads and adjacent property. Okay, I won't go into the conditions of approval. I have one more biggie, which I think relates a little bit to what Nick was saying. And I'd like to propose this, see where it goes, Mindy, okay?
Okay.
Okay. So I looked at this from the 330,000 foot level. And I'm just going to say this, and don't take it personally, but I'm proposing that the entire Coffin Butte landfill expansion is an undue burden on Benton County's government services. It's all its government services. I'm not sure which of the services are actually included in any kind of consideration, so I can't really enumerate them, but I'm just going to say on Benton County's government services. I'm concerned that Benton County recognizes Coffin Butte landfill as an asset, but does not recognize it as a significant source of extreme risk and does not plan for those risks. It's from the 30,000 foot level, it's really apparent that this process is an undue burden on at least several of the services of Benton County government, and thus a reason for denial of the application. In the words of Benton County Code, the expansion is an undue burden because it jeopardizes health, safety, and welfare, and because the implementation of improvements, such as conditions of approval, are not certain. My evidence is as follows, and I have probably about 7 of them. Benton County has no process or is otherwise not effective at institutional learning. Benton County Talks Trash resulted in very few actionable items, but there was one specific one, and that was listed in CUP-R20, which states Benton County should ensure that its land use decisions clearly capture and make binding the intent of the decision makers. Benton County 53-220 says that conditions of approval provide a specific remedy for an issue that would otherwise cause the application to be unacceptable based on code. Conditions of approval are intended to mitigate the negative impact, not simply ask for documentation of their occurrence. Monitoring and reporting are not substitutes for enforcement and effective mitigation of the harms that cause the conditional use. Let me say that again. Mitigation and reporting are not substitutes for enforcement, and they're not substitutes for effective mitigation of the harms caused by this use. Conditions of approval must be written so that they can be effectively monitored and enforced. In other words, specific, measurable, timely, etc. So the harm can be mitigated in a timely manner and with certainty. When I read the conditions of approval for this application, it was immediately obvious that the Benton County Talks Trash lesson was not learned. Most of the conditions of approval in this application need to be rewritten to be either enforceable or in any way effective. That was finding 1. Finding 2, Benton County does not monitor or enforce conditions of approval at Coffin Butte because Benton County has stated it lacks the capacity to do so. This is more evidence of undue burden on Benton County services. Reliance on a third-party contractor that is paid for by Republic Services has not been shown to change the way Benton County handles the issue of enforcement or the effectiveness of mitigation. If a contractor reports infractions to Benton County, where is the assurance of mitigation? Monitoring is not enforcement. Reporting is not mitigation. Finding 3. Benton County does not include wildfire risks at Coffin Butte Landfill in the Community Wildfire Protection Plan because Benton County has stated that it lacks the capacity to tackle it. This is more evidence of the undue burden on Benton County services. These wildfire risks at Coffin Butte are enormous, and Benton County relies on the applicant's third-party contract, whose analysis of the risk is incomplete. Finding 4, Benton County ignores BCC 77.401, or is it 410, which assures that the public is aware of conditions at the landfill that cause concern to DEQ. Benton County has stated that it lacks the capacity to do so. Finding 5, Benton County hires third-party consultants to handle the issues related to Coffin Butte because it does not have the capacity to handle the process with staff. Benton County then consistently defers to consultants' conclusions and the conclusions of the applicant and its third-party consultant. Benton County appears to be heedless of the reasonableness, evidence, or lived experience of members of the public who testify or the agencies who participated. This has at least 2 impacts. 1, it not only effectively limits the purpose of Goal 1 of the comprehensive plan, which is to involve citizens in land use decision. 2, it also, in effect, indicates that Benton County does not or cannot evaluate or correct the work of its contractors based on evidence brought forward by the public or by participating agencies. Benton County accepts whatever a contractor says, regardless of its reasonableness or efficacy. To hire a contractor and not critically review their work creates the potential for inaccuracy and a potential waste of money. The Coffin Butte landfill expansion is an undue burden on the county government, which justifies denial of this application because the result causes significant degradation to the quality and effectiveness of the staff report, its conclusions, its conditions of approval, and then those in turn jeopardize people's health, safety, and welfare. Finding 6, Benton County does not involve participating regional jurisdictions in Coffin Butte landfill issues. This is a regional landfill, but there should be regional support and input. Without regional jurisdiction involvement, Benton County will continue to solely bear the risks and burdens associated with the issues, which significantly degrades the quality and effectiveness of Benton County services related to Coffin Butte. This is especially true given the number of times Benton County states it cannot do something because it lacks the capacity. As a taxpayer, I see Benton County engaging in activities like Benton County Talks Trash and this application process at its own expense. And I hear Benton County claim its monitoring and enforcement at Coffin Butte are limited based on lack of expertise and finances. Meanwhile, I see Polk County, for example, who shares many of the risks we have discussed here. They are uninvolved.
Commissioner, I want to just caution you again to make sure that what you're saying is in the record.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if it is. I don't know if it is. Never mind. Okay. Can't remember. So let me try this one. Finding 7. In this historic period of federal transition, Benton County is unprepared for an imminent a reduction in federal environmental protections from laws and institutions that are heavily relied upon to oversee activities at Coffin Butte. This is more evidence of an undue burden on Benton County services that justifies denial of this application. So I copied the part of the first staff report that talks about how you define an undue burden. And it was very clear that these examples represent a burden, and it is an undue burden because it jeopardizes people's health, safety, and welfare. And the final statements, burdens that the county has typically not considered undue include those that can be mitigated through planned improvements that are generated by other uses in the area or that fall below an established threshold. For planned improvements to be relied upon in determining that a burden is not undue, the implement of those improvements must be certain. I'm not certain that Benton County is handling enforcement, mitigation, the application process, the production of the staff report. I'm not certain of that. Thank you.
You. Commissioner Bisco.
That's unfair, you skipped. On both sides of Commissioner Lee.
Well, also Commissioner Wilson, so. Yeah.
Right?
It's okay.
Okay. I was not prepared for that, but I will step aside from my note thread. I did have a prepared statement, and it was a lot of what we have heard here. So I really want to express my appreciation for what's been shared. I support everything that's shared and the concerns in particular of meeting the burden of proof and undue burden. I will try to extract the pieces from my written statement that have already been presented. I would just like to make a statement on Commissioner Lee's perspective on Benton County and their ability, the undue burden to Benton County, I should say. One of the things observed and.
Can you use the mic?
Oh, yes, excuse me. It is on. Is that better?
Green is on.
It is.
It's yeah.
Is that better?
Not yet, a little bit, not much.
Better? Sounds the same to me. So of concern is, as a planning commissioner, observing this process, seeing similarly the gaps that Commissioner Lee has identified, and seeing the cost to Benton County taxpayers with all of the prioritization from Benton County Talks Trash Forward, and I suspect 2021 application as well that preceded my role on the Planning Commission. There's a disproportionate amount of energy, effort, and resourcing by staff to this process. And at the end of this result, we are seeing inconclusive evidence that this expansion can meet the burden of proof and can meet, I don't want to say this, that it can actually be mitigated to meet the does not seriously interfere and does not create an undue burden. So with that, I will step back to my written statement. Just one moment. So in evaluating what arguably has been thousands of pages of record and testimony, and I think that the audience, as well as our staff and as well as our Planning Commission, has experienced that, I have a great respect for this Planning Commission body. I have seen each of the individuals bring not only their expertise to this space and their perspectives, both professional and in the public service sphere, but also take on a task that arguably is one of the most significant and comprehensive in the history of land use in Benton County. This stack of documents right here, although not by any means a full record, this document here, these are the testimonies that we've heard from the public. This is my method. I know that some of you have gone, really? Every time I bring in a stack of papers, but this is my method on how do you synthesize this much information into something meaningfully at the end. So we're funneling this tremendous amount of applicant, staff report and public testimony. I'm a list person, so what I'm going to do, since much of this has been narrated, I'm going to provide some lists in this, but also I'll introduce with a little bit of narrative. So what I see this is as a tale of kind of two landfills. We're hearing two really disparate stories, both from the public and our applicant, and then we have this staff report that's kind of merging and dancing between. I found much of the testimony very compelling, and certainly the in-person testimony as well. The question really here is whether Republic Services application for landfill expansion has met the actual burden of proof. And using code criteria regarding in particular the seriously interfere clause, the character of the surrounding area, and the imposing of undue burden is where I'm going to focus. The applicant has portrayed an operation that's fully in compliance with regulatory agency and operating as a good neighbor and with regard for Benton County residents. Public testimony from hundreds of Benton County residents, member organizations, environmental groups, visitors to Benton County, neighbors of the landfill outside of Benton County, and observers have noted that compliance may not be occurring. Benton County Planning Commissioners have been given deference, great deference in the interpretation of the code as it regards to the criteria and through use of evaluating the public testimony, the applicant's testimony, the discretion to make the decision this evening to approve or deny this application for the expansion of Coffin Butte Landfill will be based on our evaluation and interpretation of this tale of two landfills. If it is determined at the end of this evening, and I think this is important for us to keep in front of us, that the applicant has failed to meet burden of proof regarding certain criteria, the Planning Commission has the right to deny this application. My recognition to Benton County staff and the applicant for their efforts to present the Planning Commission with a thorough record of this now, I'm guessing we're approximately 6,000 pages of record for consideration has been substantive. It's noted. Thank you for the communications and thank you for this work. Just to draft, a couple pages of testimony is a lot of work to get it right. And you've done a great job of that. And I appreciate that, especially coming in kind of in between Benton County Talks Trash and this manifestation and outcome of that work. Also appreciation to each of my colleagues on the Planning Commission and Chair Fowler and Vice Chair Heyman for their obvious commitment to leading this process with integrity. Your willingness to become knowledgeable to each of us on arguably, again, one of the most complex and consequential land use applications in this county's history is respected, and I want to thank you here. Without the perhaps unprecedented, comprehensive, and compelling public testimony based on personal experience, impacts to life and livelihood, extensive research, and through professional careers experience, this Planning Commission body would be limited in navigating the complexities and nuances of this application and its supporting material submitted for the record. To the individuals and organizations providing this testimony, the countless hours of public service to this process are a measure of the greatness of this community. And I want to recognize all of you in saying that we've seen and heard your work. And I feel confident in saying that for my colleagues in this space. Two of the colleagues on this Planning Commission, for those that you may not know, Chair Nick Fowler and Commissioner Evelyn Lee served as commissioners for the 2021 landfill expansion hearing, which was denied in a unanimous vote of 6-0. Two members of this Planning Commission served on Benton County Talks Trash, and that's Commissioner Andrew Struthers joining midway in the process of BCTT, and myself having the opportunity to participate from the beginning of Benton County Talks Trash, as well as on the oft referred to conditional use permit subcommittee. That subcommittee I shared with Mr. Yeager and Mr. Patera, who has passed away during this period. But his point a point that sticks out through that process and in the record and even through the echoes of this process here are those community expectations and how we respond as decision makers to those community expectations. The testimony points of which testimony tends to circle here, but worth bearing. Again, synthesized here is, of course, our Benton County Code, the Benton County Comprehensive Plan and its policies, Benton County Thriving Communities, the 2040 Thriving Communities Initiative is often referred to, again, as an aspirational effort and document with public involvement, bringing us to that common understandings and community expectation space. The Benton County mission and vision statements, Benton County visions, or excuse me, the vision for wildfire management, and in particular, one I'll speak to after this kind of introduction is the Benton County Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And then, of course, the findings and recommendations of Benton County Talks Trash final report, which in and of itself is 1,099 pages that I don't believe is counted here because it's not fully printed here, but just provided as a resource. This hearing, in effect, is about a regional landfill accepting waste from cities and counties across Oregon and its relationship with the county of which it resides, Benton County. Referred throughout the record as the accidental landfill due to its site development as a waste dump at Camp Adair during World War II, the results were a regional landfill designation in 1974 and through numerous land use applications for expansion over the decades, bringing us to today's application for landfill expansion south of Coffin Butte Road and along Tampico Ridge. Coffin Butte Landfill is the second largest landfill in Oregon, as I read, I believe that's a correct statement, and one of Republic Service's most profitable revenue generating landfills that simultaneously comes with a great impact to Benton County services, infrastructure, public safety, and regional health of residents, along with the realities and the specter of a long-term financial and environmental obligation. Observed in the record were a number of just salient points, and they're just going to kind of hit and miss some of the things that our other commissioners have already presented. In 2023, Benton County's Coffin Butte Landfill Annual Report asserts that Coffin Butte and Republic Services provides best-in-class service and environmental stewardship to the county. This record has shown, this hearing record and public testimony has shown Republic Services apparent continual disregard for proper management of Coffin Butte Landfill, disregard for federal and state protections regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Environmental Quality, and a disregard for the health and safety quality of life, including and of very relevant to today's talking points, fire safety for Benton County. Issues with landfill gas emissions, contaminated soils, impacts to property values, quality of life for the area property owners, visitors, recreational enthusiasts, downstream Willamette River water users, impacts to infrastructure and services exist. The landfill does not operate in a void. In the best of cases, and even best-in-class service and environmental stewardship cannot address the elephant in the room. This landfill is simply not suited well for its geographic location due to excessive rainfall, the absence of ideal geologic features, and the proximity to high-density residential areas, productive farmlands, farm and forest lands, recreational and preserve areas nearby. To argue that because a mistake was made in expanding this landfill in an improper and ill-suited area is justification to continue expansion now and likely in the foreseeable future is negligent. Observed operational behaviors of Republic Services are inconsistent with good stewardship, respect of community, and concern for the well-being of an exceedingly large and increasing number of, quote, landfill neighbors. We talked about adjacent properties. The adjacent properties are no longer those properties that share boundaries with Republic Services buffer lands. The adjacent properties have now become Adair Village, Independence, Airlie, Lewisburg. The adjacent properties are the people in Corvallis that are experiencing landfill odors. Adjacent properties has become a regional definition and no longer a linear definition. What was once a regional landfill has become an industrial operation with industrial size impacts and consequences for Benton County, who is responsible for only 6 to 7% of the waste sited within its county borders. The burdens of an expansion to this county are disproportionate to its use. Revenues to the county have not been used to meaningfully manage conditions of approval, public noise and odor complaints, risk factors to water and air quality, and burden to municipal services. The political appetite and will is simply not there. The offering of $80,000 per year to offset cost does not change this lack of priority or will at the county set firmly in the record since 1974. And I will say to Commissioner Lee's point, her findings on the impacts and the undue burden to Benton County and its staff resourcing and outcomes as a result of this, I support 100%. This unchecked, unmanaged, unregulated by the county, quote unquote, asset appears to have overtaken common sense, sound science, reasonable risk management, and long-term fiscal responsibility. In the reasons for expansion discussion in the applicant process and also in the 2023 annual report, Republic Services asserts that a conditional use permit, also known as this hearing process, and the expansion to south of Coffin Butte Road would ensure continuity of disposal services while the county works to develop a sustainable materials management plan. Republic Services is requesting the COP now because industry best practice is to start working on an expansion project when there is 10 to 12 years of life remaining at the site. This is a prudent time frame, given the time that it takes an average of, 3 years or longer to complete the local land use process. After the land use process is complete, it could take an additional 3 years or longer to obtain permits required from various state agencies, and I will refer to DEQ, EPA, Department of State Lands, the State Historical Preservation Office, and others, and go back to this direct quote. And to initiate and complete construction of the disposal cells. This is on page 6 of the 2023 annual report. Despite current capacity at approximately 60 to 65%, with years of life depending on maintaining improved tonnage limits, in this time, alternative options such as use of solutions using preferentially sited Columbia Ridge landfill, with 10,000 acres of buffer zone reserved for wildlife habitat, wheat farming, cattle ranching, and wind farms has not been considered. Through this process of the tale of two landfills, applicants have told us one story, the public and our own eyes and observation tells another. Republic Services' response to imminent closure of the landfill is due to capacity. It's not due to public safety, not services to Benton County, not sustainability for the community that hosts the landfill. In short, the interests are not on Benton County. As of 2023 annual report, estimates of 13.4 years remain. 2024 expansion proposal adds approximately 6 years of life. A sustainable and cost-effective path for providing safe and reliable waste disposal for Benton County residents. Per the 2023 report, and one I think is which has been missed in this process nearly entirely, you'll see bits and pieces of it in our public testimony. But at this point, with a 39 million cubic yards of capacity for the Coffin Butte landfill and 24 million cubic yards having been consumed as of December 31, 2022, we're left with just up 15 million cubic yards of capacity. In other words, we have not even begun to complete the capacity of the current landfill and its impacts regarding leachate, odor, traffic, all of the concerns and the questions of undue burden have not even been realized while we are proposing an additional expansion beyond South Coffin Butte and considering what that might open up to for further expansions. Conditions of approval, 90 approximately, as I'm counting. Conditions of approval proposed for this application at best would improve operations of the expansion and only if enforced or complied with. This does nothing to address operational management shortfalls of the current operation at Coffin Butte Landfill. The number of conditions for this expansion area only suggests actually a far greater management problem on the current operating face and unclosed cells of the current landfill. Many of these conditions will be unenforceable due to lack of ability to distinguish between current and expansion locations at the landfill. Today's fancy legal maneuvers and interpretations of the last 50 years cannot erase what can be experienced, seen by the naked eye, smelled by the average nose, and heard by the average person with ears. The EPA and DEQ observations and enforcement actions related to non-compliance and compliance actions only reinforce what is well known by the neighbors at Coffin Butte Landfill. Just what does this application offer Benton County residents? The franchise agreement guarantees Benton County residents disposal service at a preferred rate for a number of years. I'm not sure if that was ever disclosed in the record, but there is reportedly an assurance of that. With the financial incentives for waste volumes, and approval of landfill expansion, conditional use permit applications. That's what's offered Benton County. History of 50 years of noncompliance and the county's inability to manage conditions of approval to ensure public health and safety is in the record and not subject or necessary to opine or adjudicate. The mere conditions proposed now at 90 and continuous revisions of the applicant's proposal proves this very point. I will also point back to the subcommittee, conditional use permit subcommittee, that refers to Benton County's inability to manage the conditions of approval of the past and the greater conversation around that, which is in fact that, yes, I agree and can confirm that there were missing records, but I'm going to point back to community expectations, changing of procedures and process and land use. In effect, there's a 50-year record that shows us what the community was looking for, what community concerns were, what conditions were attempted to, whether they needed to be adjudicated or otherwise, and there were perhaps shortcomings. Does not change the fact that the community had expectations. The landfill was supposed to be X, including closing in 2000, and at no time was imagined to be what it has become today. Key findings from the Benton County Talks Trash Work Group cannot be ignored in this process and are the basis for both the county and the applicant, cannot be selectively used for arguments that seem to simultaneously omit other facts and truths presented in this process. Facts in the record that do exist worth considering for this planning commission deliberation. Benton County's Coffin Butte Landfill is not a suitable location for a permanent landfill and was never intended to be one. Odor plumes have been and are continuing to be reported in an expanding pattern around the landfill and are impacting areas from Adair Village, Airlie, North Albany, Independence, South Corvallis, Philomath, and our rural neighbors in non-city areas. According to a U.S. Geological Survey publication, this is also in the record, noted that the EPA has concluded that all landfills eventually will leak into the environment. And that's from Mark Henkel's testimony, May 6, 2025, and served as a reference in that record. Conditions of approval have failed Benton County residents, leaving health and safety risks to increase to unreasonable levels. Exceedances of the 2000 franchise agreement waste limits in 2017, 2018, and 2019 are documented. Ken Kanega, May 8th, 2025. Expansion applications have been denied in the 80s, again denied in the 90s, up and until 2021, a recurring cycle and an undue burden to Benton County services, infrastructure, and the public, who is here tonight yet again. County Council has not appeared to take any enforcement action regarding past conditions of approval, instead asserting conditions were all compliant to the signing of the 2002 Memorandum of Understanding, and that was documented in Benton County Talks Trash. Benton County Health Department has made no statement and taken no position on this landfill expansion. Systems for complaints, reporting, compliance officers, and systems to manage reporting are all downstream of the real issue, which are the continuous quality of life impacts, undue burdens to the public, and Benton County infrastructure, both physical and staffing. The ever-expanding buffer zone creep, the encroaching on business and homes, the risk of groundwater impacts due to basalt ridge blasting and unpredictable fractures are foreseeable. 28 fires at the landfill were reported by Adair Rural Fire and Rescue. 5 were reported by the applicant in the testimony process. What's also in that record I'll come to is the 111 calls to fires near Coffin Butte Landfill, 195 to motor vehicle accidents near the landfill as well. And this is testimony submitted by Victoria Scott. Issues impacting the community. Coffin Butte's history of non-compliance with past conditions of approval can be seen. Patterns of negligence, methane emissions control, leachate mismanagement can also be seen and are documented. Lack of responsible landfill management, including daily cover, closure of filled cells, screening, litter control, and odor control are evidenced in the record and in daily experiences by untold numbers of Benton County residences. DEQ lacks staffing or interest in responding adequately to address complaints regarding Coffin Butte landfill odors, contaminated waste, hazardous materials runoff, permitting and regulatory compliance, and groundwater and surface contamination and air quality. Lack of safeguards through adequate permitting and a defined process. For expansion, leave this planning commission with an inadequate amount of information to make a fully informed decision on this application. The acceptance of uncontrolled, contaminated, illegal, and hazardous waste from schools, businesses, and residences are documented in this record. In particular, Doug Pollock, April 21, 2025, cites this, but Republic Services in its own testimony asserts that it's checking loads, and yet there's evidence in this record as well that shows that all loads cannot and are not being tested before they are being dumped, and there's no way to manage these risks that exist in this space adequately. Community perceptions, Benton County revenues paid by Coffin Butte Landfill are perceived as a conflict of interest or in effect a de facto payoff. And this again is based on testimony. There's questions in the testimony as well about a quiet or pending deal with Adair Village to fund larger water treatment plants and the absence of Adair Village testimony for this record. The fact is Benton County is unable to forecast the risks to Benton County, the burdens to Benton County, and the financial obligations for decades to come. There's questions if this should have been considered, a new landfill proposal rather than a landfill expansion application. David Patty, excuse me if I get the name wrong, makes a compelling argument in his April 21, 2025 testimony, along with others that submitted for the record. Groundwater contamination risks are treated with let's blast, then see what happens approach. And Commissioner Lee did a great job of outlining those concerns. Thank you, Commissioner Lee. Leachate management is not adequately addressed for this expansion. The Corvallis water treatment plant is no longer an option. It's unclear the status agreement with Salem and with continuing landfill activity for approximately 12 more cubic yards, 1.2 million, no, that might not be right either. So I forget the numbers, but over the next 10 to 12 years, regardless of the proposed expansion, it is, disregard those numbers. 10 to 12 years is correct. Leachate will increase. So again, remember that 60 to 65 capacity that we're at, the 35% that will occur in this space, plus the additions with the expansion as well, the leachate numbers will increase. Republic Services appears unwilling to comply with or ignores past conditions of approval because there is no consequence. Despite the condition of the record, there were community expectations, and there are in fact documentable past conditions of approval that have not been met. Hiring a monitor or manager is not going to assure compliance. Absence of record does not eclipse community expectations. Of extreme importance is the insufficient fire risk management and fire response management in this application, the insufficient planning for long-term management of this site post-closure, and in instance of any financial default by Republic Services in the first 30 years of its obligations. And the leachate from the first cells are still producing millions of gallons of leachates for illuminating the risk to Benton County for the next foreseeable generations. The increasing possibility of cancer clusters cannot be ignored in this record. I recommend reviewing of Tom Hughes' April 21, 2025 record, but I know there are several others as well. This particular one is the Blue Heron Homes, 6 of 8 homes having members that have contracted some form of cancer, which is a 75% rate, and now citing a total of 13 now in the Soap Creek Valley areas as of the testimony, which was not super clearly defined, but recognizing that there is an increase and a lack of analysis, evaluation, and consideration of what could be cancer clusters. It is commonly accepted that the gene mutations that are linked to cancer are linked to environmental factors. Again, this is directly from testimony. And regardless of the fact that PFAS are not produced by Coffin Butte Landfill, they are paid generously to manage and mitigate waste streams, all of them. The disparity between Republic Services claims, DEQ, and EPI site visits, reports, and actions are also of concern. I want to just take a minute when Chair Fowler mentioned the weight that we consider given to this testimony, what's provided by the staff report, provided by the applicant, and also then provided by the public testimony. I'd like to just take a moment, and again, this is just a synthesizing of information. It could be a narrative form, but it's just simpler in a bullet point form. The application, in this application for the landfill expansion hearing, we have heard from countless professionals, subject matter experts, scientists, educators, contractors, consultants, and I will list by their titles: mechanical engineers, hydrogeologists specializing in groundwater flow and contaminant transport, environmental engineers, civil engineers, GIS analysts and spatial data experts, toxicologists, former Environmental Protection Agency employees, cancer researchers, the fire chief of the Adair Borough Fire and Rescue, Aaron C. Harris, farmers that have made a career and a livelihood out of farming, recreational birders, teachers and educators, professors of fish and wildlife sciences at OSU, professor of public policy and administration at Western Oregon University. Countless numbers of peer-reviewed journal articles and reports are cited throughout this testimony. Credible news articles are cited throughout the testimony. EPA and DEQ findings are cited throughout this testimony, as well as Benton County Talks trash findings and materials from Solid Waste Advisory Council members and the Solid Waste Advisory Council, Disposable Site Advisory Committee members, and DSAC as a whole have been provided in this record. The weight, therefore, that this public testimony brings to this space is significant and worth recognizing and acknowledging, and again, represented by the folks in this room this evening. So thank you for bringing your expertise to this space. That is not to diminish in any way the personal frontline experiences of those who may not hold those certifications, degrees, or otherwise experiences who are bringing to us their real life impacts to their livelihoods and their life's quality of life. Questions of compliance and or violations of past landfill conditions of approval. So non-compliance violations, EPA, DEQ, kind of lumped them all together. The contour elevation exceeding the 600-foot contour elevation expectation and or limit. The interpretation of screenings, fencing, or berms so as to not to see the Coffin Butte landfill, which seems somewhat humorous at this point in time, but nonetheless has been a condition of approval in the past. The odor control and mitigation, of which we heard in testimony, Republic Services all but said we could not confirm 1 or 2 of 84 reports, and much of it was dismissed as not from the landfill. Reclamations, part of the expectations or conditions of approval. I do not think at any time that Benton County, any of its leadership, any of its planning and land use professionals, nor the public anticipated a landfill being covered indefinitely under torn tarps, flapping in the breeze, not being reclaimed as was expected to be, recreational areas, use areas, farm areas, or just green areas. To that point, I will point to Mark Henkel's May 2025 testimony that speaks to the difference between Coffin Butte, the contrast with Columbia Ridge up in Arlington. First, a 10,000 acre buffer surrounds this site 10 miles south of Arlington. That buffer is preserved for wildlife habitat, wheat farming, cattle ranching, and wind turbines. People live, recreate, and even hold 4-H events and animal training clinics right next to Coffin Butte, and the odors and blowing waste, odors and blowing waste is Coffin Butte part. Mm-hmm. Second, as you are hearing this, can you imagine the young woman whose cow's name was Potato and Paisley, McKenna, was it? Her speaking to the impact as a 4-H'er, future leader, not quite yet out of high school, pursuing a career and a future in agriculture, having to walk her animals in her pasture adjacent to the landfill due to the risks that the landfill has brought to their property, and in tears before this planning commission. So this one's for Paisley and Potato, right? Second, Mark Henkel's testimony, and this is to, again, Columbia Ridge landfill, has the capacity to continue running for another 120 years based on volume projections from customers, including the Metro. Eastern Oregon is a good place for the landfill, in part because of drier weather to protect against contaminants seeping into groundwater. And it's just a comparison, and one that this planning commission and this body should consider. Coffin emissions, again, these are non-compliance or violations that are reported in the record. Coffin Butte emissions are so high, the EPA now considers landfill as a super emitter, a term that is used to describe only the nation's worst industrial polluters. It's unclear if fires and all landfill fires are reported to the DEQ per the operation plan. That's from Victoria Scott's testimony, May 8, 2025. The alternate daily cover use of tarps are non-compliant, leaving working face of landfill regularly exposed and confirmed by satellite images and additional testimony. Ken Kanega, May 8, 2025. The failure to cover working face of the landfill with soil tarps or adequate alternate daily cover. Cell closure requirements. It's unclear and bounces around between there are none or there are some closures, but at the end of the day, we're on cell 6. And all of those preceding cells presumably have been closed or are close to closure. What does that cell closure look like? And in effect, it looks like a mountain full of plastic tarps and otherwise billowing in the wind. There are no obvious observable closures, and the record is inconclusive. The runoff of contaminated tire, the runoff that occurs from contaminated tires, wheels, and trucks into uncontrolled runoff areas constituting hazardous materials or waste contamination or leachate, the uncontrolled litter, the uncontrolled noise mitigations. Of questions still of compliance are the land use compatibility statements, the delays in installation of the enclosed methane gas flares requiring DEQ enforcement action. That was presented by Beyond Toxics, Mason Levitt, May 6, 2025. Republic Services recently acknowledging 10% fugitive emissions. It says last year in this document. I don't know what last year is specifically referred to, but now in the application revised to 25%. Also from Beyond Toxics, May 6, 2025. That's a large difference from 10% to 25% fugitive emissions, and that refers to methane gas emissions. It also refers to hydrogen sulfide, other fugitive emissions and gases, and also particulate matter with contaminants, including PFAS. There are inconsistencies in this record with the quote of regular surface emissions and monitoring repair holes and covers and tarps as presented by Republic Services versus the visual observation of torn and unrepaired covers. The EPA violations found and well documented in 2022 and again in 2024, EPA being a federal enforcement and federal enforcement actions actually taken subsequently. Republic Services opting not to monitor up to 56% of landfill surface area through legal loophole. This was also in Beyond Toxics and relates to the EPA or DEQ noticed. They reported that they were coming, so they were given opportunity to remediate any issues. Those enforcement agencies came to the site, and what they found were these loopholes. So do we feel that Republic Services is best of service and looking at stewardship of environmental concerns, or do we have inconsistencies in this record that point to these types of questions? Again, the plumes of landfill gas emissions visible by satellite, inconclusive, not fully documented, not analyzed adequately. There's no evaluation, and there's no way for this body to actually determine how to analyze the risk that occurs in what is obvious record testimony that shows what's happening with those gas plumes. The explosive levels of methane leaks found repeatedly, and there are any number of testimony comments about that, but the fact is that our federal and state agency partners have recognized those explosive levels and made record of it. The Section 114 EPA Clean Air Act enforcement served in 2025. If that's not 100% accurate, that's taking several public testimony, but it is the EPA Clean Air Act, and it is an action enforcement that was taken. The delays in fence line monitoring for odor pollutants, which could have occurred prior to this application. Incomplete data sets regarding odor monitoring. Management of hazardous waste streams, including pesticides, contaminated soils, batteries, fluorescent lights, pharmaceuticals, paint, solvents, electronics, and refrigerants. Any of you that have farms, gardens, you take care of your vehicles. If you took everything in your garage and dumped it in your swimming pool, would you jump in? And that might be a generalization, but the fact is these are hazardous materials. They're entering into this waste stream. And then the wastewater treatment plant process through the aeration release of airborne PFAS is part of this conversation, as well as the process and how it's being mitigated. The undue burdens, and this is, I'll try to pull out the ones we've talked about, but there are numbers a couple of them that I really want to point to. The data inconsistencies in this record and inaccuracies by all appearance is troubling for how we should make a decision on this actual application. There is data linking, so undue burdens to this community, whether it be to community individuals, quality of life, seriously interfere, infrastructure, our staffing, whichever number of those, this all kind of falls in under that umbrella. So there's data linking hydrogen sulfide gas emissions to lung cancer. What does that mean to our neighborhoods? PFAS, the notorious endocrine disruptor, and carcinogens. 10 to 12 years of odor, or for 10 to 12 years, many testimonies would say had not really experienced odor as an issue, but increasing over time with the expanding size of Coffin Butte Landfill, which can only be then expected to increase as we fill in that last 35 to 40% of the currently approved operations, and then any extended operations beyond that. It's estimated 6 to 7% of landfill waste is from Benton County, who is in fact hosting 27 counties, up to as many as 36, and Benton County talks trash. It depends on the time frame from which we're talking, from 3 or 4 states, again, depending on which testimony we're talking, and Benton County talks trash reporting. So that is from Oregon, Idaho, Washington, and California in the record. That's a tremendous undue burden to Benton County in all capacities and all ways, to all of the subsets of undue burden that we're speaking of with this group. The 2021 application for expansion unanimously was denied, finding it would cause significant harm to Benton County. So up until 2021, this is the position that our planning leaders were taking. Less than 60% of methane emissions from Coffin Butte Landfill are captured per DEQ, submitted by Debbie Palmer, May 6, 2025. Again, this is undue burdens. Benton County's lack of updated waste management plan, the cumulative effect of odor, noise pollution, air quality, uncontrolled litter, traffic congestion, visual blight, ground and surface water contamination is indeed substantial. And it's emanating from this growing mountain of waste that starkly contradicts the professed values of our community. The depressed property values resulting in reduced funding for the Airlie Rural Fire and Response. A very clear testimony for those of you that understand how those fire districts are funded. When property values decrease, so too go decrease the percentages that fund, in this case, a fire district. What does that mean to Airlie Rural Fire and Rescue? Well, that means reduced capacity, reduced resources. So those depressed property values aren't only impacting homeowners, they are impacting that small region of properties that support and fund the Rural Fire and Rescue District, which in fact, in turn, can impact their response to Coffin Butte Landfill specific or related fires. The expansion impacts of the construction period reported by Republic Services to be up to 8 months. A couple of the commissioners have commented this is not part of this conversation. When we talk about noise, when we talk about traffic, when we talk about impacts and quality of life to the adjacent property owners, it's not been considered in the application and has not been presented here other than the intermittent testimony from the public. The expansion risk to wells and springs in and near Tampico Ridge area, which Commissioner Lee has pointed to very well and very accurately based on this record. The traffic impact analysis does not adequately improve, and this ones we haven't talked about significantly here, but that traffic impact analysis as presented does not include construction traffic. It does not include the expansion of the traffic around it, and any other planning and land use applications I've been a part of have required that we consider what's happening, for example, in Adair Village, and how might that affect that traffic impact analysis. It seems that TIA was very insignificant in its analysis. If I heard correctly, we sat on the corner and we counted a number of vehicles. It's not really the kind of modeling that I would expect us to use when we are considering this. But at the end of this day, we have an entire construction phase before even an expansion phase that we are not considering that traffic impact to the region. The potential future closure of Coffin Butte Road, a reality whether presented here or not, is a potential and real risk that as planning commissioners, we should be considering. And up to 35% more increase in the dump's total surface area. What does that mean with the proportional increase in risk, impact, emissions, et cetera, and the vehicle traffic increase as well? The no risk analysis of financial burden to county, present impacts, the closure of the landfill financial burden to Benton County residents and taxpayers, and the post-closure impacts, and then the long-term financial burden as well. The risk of, excuse me. The risk of reduction in disaster assistance is a rural area, and I think Commissioner Lee actually pointed to some of that as well. PFAS in both leachate and in airborne gases is not something that we talked about substantively here. In particular, the bioaccumulations in surrounding environment found in the groundwater and surface water, but also perhaps even equally as important in soil aggregates, in plant material, in livestock that exist in and around this PFAS airborne gases plume, which is clearly undefined at this point. The risk of an expanded or new landfill as an additional source of arsenic was touched on here, but we have no data of which to move forward on in any deliberation on that topic. The ongoing disturbance to the great blue heron nesting colony. The DEQ's unresponsive or lacking follow-through, again, in and of itself is another point. How do we rely on an unknown state partner when it relates to criteria outside of our criteria, but it does relate to our criteria when we talk about undue burden? Benton County staffing. How much to accept, categorize, archive, review, and summarize for this expansion application? How much, meaning how much time, how much resourcing, how much financial cost? These are positions that are paid. They are positions that have benefits. What are we giving up in order to prioritize what could arguably be considered an undue burden? Would County Planning Commission residents be better served by using these limited county resources on other efforts, such as the comprehensive plan review that is in process, but slowly? Our citizen involvement advisory committees, which have been set aside, part of Oregon's land use goal #1. Our interest in fire, which when I first came on the commission had been talked about, the planning commission that is, had been talked about in 2021 as priorities for this group. It is now 2025 and we've spent little to no time on fire risk management. It's a conversation that commissioners have brought up repeatedly, but there's a capacity limit to our staffing. The undue burden to Benton County residents, in particular those on properties near the landfill, being forced to sacrifice their comfort and livability for the sake of others, not just in Benton County, but regionally and in counties across Oregon, including Idaho and Washington, that all benefit from the Coffin Butte landfill, but do not pay a proportional responsibility, burden, or fiscal liability to this industrial operation. The inability of those residents to recreate or work outdoors, children who are unable to play outdoors, direct health impacts, burning eyes, lungs, tightening of chest, reports of cancer clusters, all things we've heard in this testimony. The resorting by countless testimony, both in writing and before this planning commission, of individuals being forced to close their windows due to extreme odor, the impacts to farming, the maps documenting methane and odor plumes far exceeding what Republic Services is willing to admit. Coffin Butte, Virginia Scott's testimony, the single place in Benton County where more fires have started in the last 50 years than any other location. It points to the fire risk and the realities. In 2018, May and July 2024, fires at the landfill responded to by Adair Rural Fire and Rescue. We have had flare events in that case. We have had grass fires in those cases. In this particular instances, it was 2 flare proximity fire events in 1 year, of which Republic Services says they have implemented mitigation that should have prevented that second fire from happening. After hours fires have been referenced. The negative impacts on wildlife have been referenced. However, our public testimony far exceeds the applicant's consultant that provided testimony on the heron rookeries, on the elk migration patterns, on the eagles and their influence in this space. And we're left to determine, again, this tale of 2 landfills, which is the truth and which bears more weight. To the fire risk and Virginia Scott's testimony, I do want to point to the motor vehicle accidents responded to by Adair Rural Fire, 111 from 2013 to 2025. How many of those are landfill related? And that's a question that we cannot answer because we do not have that evidence. It has not been an emphasis of this application, and yet it's here in this testimony looking at us to answer, what about those motor vehicle accidents? What are the hidden costs of this landfill application for expansion versus the benefits of lower cost waste services? It's a good question. omissions, leachate, groundwater contaminations, and we're familiar with the list. 20% of individuals of 126 surveyed in Adair Village reported modifying outdoor activities to avoid going outside due to odor, concerns of exposure to toxins. When we expand the landfill by another 35 to 40% of capacity, and then we consider this application, what does that mean for Adair Village? And I literally have from this record about 2 more pages, of which I'm going to jump beyond of undue burden, but they are all from this testimony here. And some of them you'll hear and some of them you will recognize. The ones that I really do want to circle back to is the fire risk, and I've pointed on them, but Virginia Scott's testimony in particular, on page 6 of her testimony, highlights the landfill fires, the landfills in the region of the landfill, fires in the nearby area of the landfill. And then also the composting site fires, which of course are not the landfill specific, but what are the risks of those emerging embers and or spreading embers in high humidity instances and high wind events. To that point, 28 landfills in that 2013 to 2025 period, 17 of the composting site fires, 111 nearby fires. The motor vehicle accidents were listed at 195. So I apologize, I cited 195, 111 as the motor vehicles. It's actually 195. The 111 is nearby fires. So that's Virginia Scott's, and that's based on records of the Adair Fire District. And so when we look at that, do we have adequate information? I do not feel like I have adequate information to go, yes, just this undue burden alone in today's fire, not only actually environmental climate, but political climate and the reality of what's occurring in Oregon already this year with fires. This is a risk that seems has been glossed over and not given adequate or sufficient burden. The burden of proof has not been met in this space. I will point to, but not read in any explicit detail, the full submittal by the fire chief. But I do want to point to number 2. There's been a significant increase in daily truck trips to the landfill over the last 5 to 10 years. Has the county performed an analysis on vehicle trips, motor vehicle collisions, road conditions during this time? Has the county analyzed data with surrounding counties along major travel routes from counties that transport to Coffin Butte Landfill? Has there been an increased burden on emergency services along these routes? Is the annual tonnage cap, if it is listed, an expected consequence of any expansion? What additional burden will be placed on transports transported, I think is what it's supposed to read, waste to our county? How will that burden be compounded if there is also corresponding drop in property tax revenue? And I think that number 2 in the chief's statement really circles around the bigger question here, which is we don't know. We can't plan because we don't know. And these are real risks and real concerns. I'll also point to my comment about bioaccumulations. We received public testimony from the Marys River Grange. Just for full disclosure, I'm a member, although at a distance member of the Marys River Grange. I did not know they were submitting that testimony, but their point was sound, and that was about the dispersion of PFAS through emissions. So air particulates, when we talk about PFAS and gas emissions as well, and how that impacts our immediate farms, as in our businesses, their livelihoods, gathering together farms, right? Green Gable Farms, Sunville Farms in that area. Also, we have Windy Hill Farm and any number of others up closer to the landfill. How many farms are out there? There is numerous testimonies in here about farmers who cannot get workers to come back to their farm because of odors, because of breathing complications, and what and how is that impacting, and there's scientific data referenced in this testimony as well that speaks to that bioaccumulation of these toxins, in particular PFAS, which is considerably smaller than microplastics and is being found within the bloodstreams of humans and animals at this time. So we don't know. And that's, again, an undue burden for this body and this community. I'll high point, again, this was a long list and it's extracted from this testimony and the annual reports as well. What's actually going into our landfill? And this was a question that was difficult to get answered even during Benton County Talks Trash. It would be in that record. It was also difficult as a planning commissioner to get those questions fully answered. And it feels like there's a lot of wiggle room. So anybody that stood there with a 5-year-old who's got a handful of cookies and a mouthful of chocolate chips and the cookie jar is over there going, wasn't me. That's how this felt. And it doesn't mean to be disrespectful, but again, there's a cognitive distance between what we're hearing and what we're seeing and what we're reading in these records. So what is going in the landfill based on testimony? Municipal biosolids. And in fact, what that is the dilution of any number of toxins, heavy metals, contaminants, including PFAS. There are records and in this testimony as well, where those municipal biosolids are used as fertilizer on farmlands. And there are tens of millions of farmlands that are now no longer able to sustain livestock and or crops because of the biosolids and the toxins that have been carried to those spaces. This has been a marketable product for the waste management sphere. So we don't really know what we're looking at this application. We hear that the organics are capped at 900,000 tons, but it felt like there was some wiggle room. Just think the cookie jar in that space as well. And I don't feel like I have answers to say that, yeah, we're not concerned about municipal biosolids. We should be. Anything that goes into our landfill, again, the liners will leak. So what does that look like for leachate? What does it look like for fire exposure? What does it look like for gas emissions? Livestock carcasses, Tillamook cattle, unknown disease and contaminants. In the world of bird flu, reportedly moving on to hoofed animals, including cattle, what does that mean when we are bringing in livestock carcasses to Coffin Butte landfill? Unknown other industrial contaminants, solvents, epoxies, fluorescent lights, containers of paint, televisions, refrigerant systems, e-waste. Organic fish and slaughterhouse waste. Again, what does that mean to this Coffin Butte leachate and gas emissions ecosystem that we have housed in Benton County? Other hazardous materials that are unregulated, unknown, including batteries, agricultural chemicals, major fire and disaster debris we saw in 2020, 2021, and I think I saw references as recent as 2024. We know that those are hazardous materials as well. We also know that hazardous materials are specifically and explicitly being taken into Coffin Butte landfill. What is the environmental impact over the next several generations and immediately? Contaminated waste from consumers' power was cited in testimony, including wood preservatives for telephone poles. Any of you who've used telephone poles or railroad ties for your gardens probably know better by now. These are ending up in our landfill or have ended up in our landfill. PCBs from leaking transformers, Covanta incinerator ash, including medical waste, previously had been used as an alternate daily cover and including heavy metal contaminants. Superfund waste, not just this is a super emitter location, actual Superfund waste from other locations are being brought to Coffin Butte landfill. Forever chemicals have been lots of conversations, but lots more to come in the future. 3 to 4 orders of magnitude smaller than most microplastics is here the reference I have from that, now being identified in the circulatory system of humans and animals with the potential to affect growth, learning, behavior in infants and older children, could lower women's chance of getting pregnant and could increase the risks of cancer. Bill Gallatley, May 6, 2025, but also cited by numerous others. What else is going into our landfill? So the hearing process for me really illuminated a lot of questions. I thank all of my planning commissioners for their patience in asking those questions, but I really appreciate the questions that my peers asked as well, because I feel like we came to a lot of conclusive information for this record that helps us with this process. For me, I am not confident that this application meets any number of burdens of proof, nor protections or mitigations for undue burden for Benton County residents. I have a list of what's coming out of the landfill. It's in the testimony. I'm not going to read that. I will read in closing, however. And you'll bear with me while I scroll to that, please. Oh, I'll cite this before I get to closing. Not only, again, synthesizing data. We've looked at these records. We've sat before the individuals in the community, the applicant, and the staff report. The membership numbers that were represented in this testimony were significant. It wasn't individuals, couples, and families only. It was the Marys River Grange, the League of Women Voters in Corvallis, the Oregon chapter of the Sierra Club, 350 Salem, the Great Old Broads of the Wilderness. Thumbs up for whoever named that. That's great, by the way. Way to go on that one. We have BNEX, right? Valley Neighborhood, Neighbors for Environmental Quality and Safety, which have had a solid presence here, but have brought a tremendous amount of value in their testimony. The Mid-Willamette Bird Alliance, the Audubon Society of Corvallis, and again, translate this into numbers of membership because these are official submittals by these bodies. the volunteers of the Willamette River Keepers. The NREC, which is our Environmental and Natural Resources Advisory Committee for Benton County, never intended to be tasked with the Solid Waste Advisory Council or the Disposal Site Advisory Committee's work, and yet came through in this space and provided that report for us. Beyond Toxics has been present along the way here. Adair Rural Fire District, it's the Adair Fire, help me out.
Adair Rural Fire Protection.
Thank you. I'm from Willamette, that's different, and I always hear that when I go to say it. So thank you to them as well. Benton County Republicans submitted testimony in opposition. These are all in opposition. Benton County Democrats, the Lynn Benton Pacific Green Party, private citizens who serve in elected positions as well, not representing those elected bodies, but in fact, recognizing that they sit in that space in our community. So it's important that we acknowledge the weight of these testimonies as it relates to those bodies and individuals as well. Further, we have had legislative action taken in this last 2025 legislative session. We have seen Senator Ron Wyden, Senator Jeff Merkley, Representative Val Hoyle get involved on oversight and issues and concerns over what's happening at Coffin Butte Landfill. We have also seen Senator Deb Patterson. There's another senator up from that area as well. I don't know my name personally, but he's also been involved in that process. We have seen Representative Sarah Finger McDonald as also step into this space of which is perceived undue burdens and documentable in the record could be arguably concluded that the undue burden is significant. My concern is this, is that a vote to approve this application is in effect an extension of the status quo, with little means to regulate, enforce, limit, mitigate, or recall any short-sighted, insufficiently informed, or pressured decision for minimal revenues at a tremendous long-term and immediate expense for Benton County residents is irresponsible based on our duties. The threat of increased garbage rates is not a justification for approving this expansion, and it is manifested as a small price to pay to protect and reclaim, if it is manifested, where we incur increased garbage rates to find solutions to rail dispatch waste to a more reasonable sited location for waste in the state of Oregon. That increased garbage rate manifested as a small price to pay to protect and reclaim Soap Creek Valley and surrounding neighborhoods, the farm, forest, and recreational areas, and the quality of life that we cherish here in Benton County. The selling off the future safety, health, and well-being of our residents, the health of our environment for generations to come is a betrayal and a neglect of the duties bestowed on Benton County. There is no price tag worth that trade-off. I hope that the decisions do not bring us to this place, but I imagine what this looks like if we make the wrong decision here, where we have the Coffin Butte Landfill Museum of Benton County, where the Herons used to visit next to the sites, where visitors used to fish and recreate, kayak, swim, where bicyclists used to travel in the region and appreciate the views and the vistas and the animals and the experience, where well water used to be clean, where the air used to be fresh, where farmland produced clean and safe produce and crops, where homeowners sat, played, and worked outdoors in their yards, where the Willamette River was less polluted, where drinking water was safe, where people were healthy with reduced risks or recovery from cancers. What I see in that space is a dystopian nightmare of what once was a beautiful Benton County. And I'm a 20-year resident of Benton County as well, 22 this December. There is no assurance that after a 50-year history of documented gaps in compliance of conditions of approval, documented violations of EPA and DEQ environmental regulations, and disregard for the health, safety, and financial solvency of Benton County, that there is any condition of approval, much less 90, that would serve Benton County. No amount of threatened increase in waste service fees can compensate for the outlandish risk that Benton County and all its residents are being asked to assume through this application. A denial of this application secures protections for Benton County from any further expansion at this time. It forces Republic Services and the waste stream producers to address an imminent closure of this landfill. along with the requirement for better alternative solutions. Anything less is a denial of the responsibility of Benton County to protect its residents by honoring the comprehensive plan, the 2040 Benton County Thriving Community Initiative, the Benton County Code, and most importantly, the expectations for those served by this county who deserve a safe, sustainable quality of life through environmental stewardship and protections. In the end, this landfill expansion is really about revenue generation for Republic Services versus the frontline experiences of Benton County residences, their financial futures in public infrastructure and services. To quote Mark Lee's April 2025, some of you just said it better than I can. These are real people, families with children, not to mention wildlife and farm animals that are being affected by the mismanagement of this landfill. All these concerns about the current problems with the landfill obviously need to be addressed and resolved before entrusting more waste into the hands of Republic Services. I see no reason to believe that Republic Services would somehow do a better job of managing an enlarged footprint of their facility. The solution to this mountain of waste that we currently experience is not to expand the location where it is being placed. Benton County has said loudly, set a date and expectations for closure of the landfill, begin reclamation of closed cells to comply with past conditions of approval and community expectations, seek alternative appropriately cited waste locations for regional Oregon. An assurance that through careful risk management and evaluation of environmental risk reduction will resulting from current operations, a fiscal assessment and assurance of adequate closure and post-closure actions and compliance, and end to continuing applications for expansion, which has placed tremendous burden on the public, Benton County resources, infrastructure, and at a cost of other Benton County priorities and initiatives, a return to breathable air, return to safe drinking and well water, the right to livability and livelihood. Benton County has asked for solutions and not more expansions. The contempt that Republic Services has shown openly to the public during this process and during Benton County Talks Trash for those that were expressing concerns is in fact a contempt for Benton County. The disregard by Republic Services of the many conditions of approval that by observations alone are in question and operational best practices at the Coffin Butte Landfill site is a genuine disregard of Benton County. And the persistent dismissal by Republic Services of federal and state regulatory authority is a de facto dismissal of the needs, the safety, the well-being, and the future of Benton County and its residents. I will leave you with this undue burden. If just one well is destroyed because of this landfill presently mismanaged by an oversight, mismanagement of oversight, conditions of approval, if just one property is lost, sold, pressured out of the area because they can no longer procure their livelihood, if just one parent is lost, if just one child is lost, if one business is lost, if one family is lost, one horse, one cow, potato and paisley, which of us would trade places with those individuals? And which of us would accept the responsibility of that loss? Because that is undue burden. And that is why I cannot and do not support this application under any conditions of approval. Again, reviewing 50 years of record gives me no confidence that this application as presented provides enough assurances and guarantees that this decision, if approved, will protect the safety, the health, and the well-being of Benton County residents. So, thank you.
We are going to take.
Out of order.
No positive or negative comments, please. Now, we're going to take a 10-minute break because I need one. And we'll come back. Okay.
You got everybody. Yeah, Catherine's over there. Catherine. That's right there. Yeah, you got everyone.
We're going to get going again.
On behalf of Greg. On behalf of
Has Commissioner Cash joined us?
Or.
Okay.
Hey, Catherine.
But I know you don't want to. Cash.
Circle around.
7.
We're fine. Right.
Yes.
Okay. We are reconvene. We have, remember, opening comments are voluntary, but we have 3 more commissioners to provide their opening comments, help us to deliberate towards a decision this evening, okay? And the next person is Commissioner Fulford.
Thank you, Vice Chair Heyman. First off, I want to state, I don't think we can say this enough, right? I want to recognize and thank all that participated in this complex and weighty process. The time, thoughtfulness, and lived experiences expressed during and through the public testimony have been deeply valuable. I want to also acknowledge the applicant, Republic Services, for their detailed efforts, their willingness to adjust their proposal the time and time again to responses and concerns. Also, our Benton County staff have worked diligently to compile, review, and present an enormous amount of data and information to support the decision-making process. So thank you. These type of deliberations are never easy. They carry long-term implications for our land, residents, environment, and regional policies. As a community, Benton County faces rising land values and an increasing cost of living, making thoughtful land use planning even more critical. Decisions we make today, especially concerning major infrastructure like landfills, will shape the economic, environmental well-being of our county for generations. The Coffin Butte landfill was once located far away from town. Today, residential and economic development has expanded, drawing our communities much more closer to the landfill boundary than we probably ever wanted to. While the desert or remote areas served by rail offer lower impact options in the future, the proximity today of this site to schools, homes, major corridors raises legitimate concerns about compatibility. My focus is going to be narrow today. Obviously, sitting next to Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Bisco, the comprehensive summaries have been pretty much covered. So I'm going to narrow it down. The legal policy foundation is Benton County Code 53.220, which requires a proposal will not seriously interfere with use on adjacent property, and the use will not alter the character of the area or unduly burden the public facilities. Even if mitigation is proposed, serious interference or burdens must be avoided, not just reduced. Approval requires clear evidence that adverse impacts will not occur, not just promises of monitoring or offsetting after the fact. So some key arguments: incompatibility with the evolving character of the area. The landfill is no longer isolated. Urban and rural residential areas have expanded, making this land use increasingly incompatible, right? This is a 25-year decision to 2052 in the context of massive residential growth and land scarcity. Staff reports and BCTT findings confirm growing public opposition and a changing standard of compatibility. Unsolved legacy and future oversight failures. Past CUP conditions remain unmet. Screening boundary violations with significant visual and land use consequences. Benton County relies on a complaint-based enforcement model acknowledged as insufficient by both staff and the applicant. Proposed OP17 third-party monitoring is untested and does not correct longstanding systemic enforcement issues. If compliance was inadequate under previous conditions, trust in the future compliance over 3 decades is questionable. DEQ reliance argument fails the local compatibility test. DEQ and EPA environmental compliance does not negate BCC 53.220 requirements for land use compatibility. Local authority remains essential to address noise, odor, traffic, water, and character impacts. odor, litter, fire mitigations are promissory. We've heard that several different times. The CUP undermines county climate and waste goals. Approval extends Coffin Butte's life to 2052, disincentivizing alternative site planning or waste innovations. It also delays in exploring zero waste solutions or new regional facilities are likely. So based on the evidence of record, the proposed expansion does not meet the compatibility standard of 53-220. The landfill is increasingly incompatible with surrounding land use, creates undue burdens on nearby residents, presents unsolved risks despite proposed mitigation. A cut for expansion through 2052, especially without a holistic regional solid waste strategy in place, does not align with public interest. I recommend denying the application. There you go.
Thank you, Commissioner Folkley. Commissioner Strother.
Thank you, Vice Chair Heyman. And thank you to everyone, as it's been said, and probably needs to keep being said, that's participating in this process. Particular to our staff, I want to give some kudos that, at least from my perspective as a decision maker, this process has felt smooth. I'm sure behind the scenes it has not been smooth, but from someone looking outside in, it looks like, I'm sure as someone who works IT, there have been multiple issues with uploading documents, especially the volume that we've had. So also thank you to the applicant and the community that participated. This process has gone smoothly, much smoothly than I've seen in other land use hearings. To the application, I primarily focused on 53.215 in the DCC 53.215 in the code. In particular, the proposed use does not seriously interfere with uses on adjacent property, with the character of the area, or with the purpose of the zone. And for those who know me, who've known me in the public for a while and in different roles, though, I try to find the compromise and try to find how do the things work. And usually when you have conditions of approval like this, that usually helps you get there. But I keep coming back to this, it doesn't work. It doesn't fit, even with the conditions of approval that have been added in. There in the record, in the discussion, there was that this portion, this expansion is an expansion of current operations. But for me, as someone who's looking at this, I still can't see how this is actually an expansion of the current operations because it's not connected. It's actually on this southern side of Coffin Butte Road. It's actually away from current operations. And so, yes, it's an expansion of operations, but to me, it's not an expansion of the landfill because the land is not actually connected. And so and that's just how my mind has gotten into this. I think it does interfere with adjacent property. It's going to change the character of the area because you're going not to have one large, and excuse my terminology, mountain of trash. You're going to actually have two that will be separated by road. And so it changes. Essentially, you're creating a valley with Coffin Butte Road and going in between the two areas. And so to me, it does change the character of the area. I agree with everything that Commissioner Bisco and Commissioner Lee have said, as well as Commissioner Fulford before me, and Chair Fuller. I'm trying to summarize here in some of this so that we're not hearing things over again. I am concerned on the groundwater. I wasn't satisfied in what I heard related to groundwater in particular, and maybe it's just because that's just the process and how information came in. And what's happening with the durability and testing groundwater, especially their drinking water. Yes, there was comments that Corvallis is testing and their drinking water is clean, and that's because it's not coming from the same source away from the landfill. But I would have liked to hear more related to Adair Village and that area. And so I do have concern that maybe it is not, maybe it's clean at times it's being tested, maybe not, but not all times. I want to thank Commissioner Lee for her comments and findings around government services. I believe that does fit in, and I pulled up the code here so I could have it within that 53.215. part two, that the proposed use does not impose an undue burden on any public improvement, facilities, utilities, or services. I would agree that includes government services. I had not actually considered that until you had brought that up, Commissioner Lee, so thank you for that. And so I believe this expansion of operation in a setting of a new landfill or a new area would seriously interfere under both 53215 part 1 and part 2. And I'll leave it there for our discussion later.
Thank you. Commissioner Wilson.
Thank you, Vice Chair Heyman. I appreciate you. I'm going to keep it as brief as I can because I think all of us, my fellow commissioners, would like to be able to have further discussions to come to a decision. But I first wanted to thank staff, the Community Development Department, who have done yeoman's work in preparing all of the materials and not just their reports, both first one and the second one, but also preparing all of the public testimony in written form and available to us online in a comprehensive manner in which we can review that material as well as how it related to the public testimony that we heard at our public hearings. That they also facilitated all of that, all of our public hearings has been appreciated. And so, because I and my fellow commissioners, we are citizen commissioners. We're not subject matter professionals. We're not professional land planners. We are citizen planners who try to represent the best interests of our community, Benton County. And so I appreciate the Community Development Department and the work that they've done. I also appreciate the applicant's work and the diligence and the effort that was put into preparing their application for this expansion. The information was exceedingly helpful in terms of my ability to be able to synthesize all the information that was provided with regards to how this situation and how this expansion would affect our community. I also want to thank my fellow commissioners because we've all been able to work collaboratively in this effort. And I think we've been respectful to each other and have been receptive to listening to both positions and ideas that we agree with and position ideas that we don't agree with. And so I think that I appreciate my fellow commissioners in that manner. At this point, I think that the words of Chair Fowler that were spoken at the beginning of our hearing tonight speak volumes as to how I have synthesized and perceived this application. And Chair Fowler spoke directly to, and I think my fellow commissioners are relying as well on section 53.215 as the criteria, sections 1, 2, and 3. And I remain unpersuaded by the county's staff report that with these voluminous conditions of approval, that this expansion will serve the best interests of Benton County and our residents. And so through the deliberation process, as Chair Fowler said, if I can be persuaded that they can meet the requirements, that the conditions of approval could make the expansion in the best interests as under 53.215, that I'm receptive to listening to that as well. But at this point, I remain unpersuaded. I want to commend Commissioner Lee, Commissioner Biscoe, Commissioner Fulford, and Struthers for their detail of both the information, especially with Commissioner Lee talking about the undue burden on government services, and with Commissioner Biscoe addressing a lot of the public testimony, a lot of which I think that as we sat through some of that public testimony, some of it was pretty emotional. And I think that I can speak for my fellow commissioners that that testimony that we heard on those multiple nights of public testimony were very impactful. I appreciate the points that Commissioner Fulford and Bo Struthers have made with regards to the details about how both with undue burden and with seriously interfering with the adjacent properties and the community itself, because the landfill, as I think my fellow commissioners have pointed out, isn't just affecting the adjacent properties. It affects a much wider community of which I'm a member. I live in Adair and live in North Benton County. So it is present to our community, to the community of North Benton County, to central Benton County, and those even in southern Corvallis, city of Corvallis. So all of those, I think, have a great deal of weight to be considered. And so I'm going to close my remarks at this point to allow us to continue deliberation with regards to the land use application before us so that we can reach our decision. Thank you, Vice Chair Hammond.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilson. I believe that Commissioner Cash was not able to join us. Is that correct? Okay. We will move forward at this point. Yes, Commissioner Struthers.
I would have a motion to offer.
Yes.
I move that the conditional use permit for expansion of the Coffin Butte Landfill be denied based on evidence in the record and findings in opposition and conclusions developed at the public hearing, as well as provided in the opening statements by planning commissioners tonight.
I can second that motion, Vice Chair Hammond.
We have a first and a second motion to deny. Conversation. Yes.
I went through the conditions of approval and,
Do you have a microphone?
oh, yes, I went through the conditions of approval, not thoroughly and not in detail. But I found many of them, most of them, perhaps not all of them, need to be completely rewritten in order to provide any level of enforcement. And I can give you an example if I can find it. Yes. E15.
So is this a discussion to not deny?
No, it's
Okay,
to
so-
deny.
Okay. Yes.
I just have a question for Commissioner Lee. Can you tie that into how you discuss the undue burden?
Yes,
Okay. Thank
if you want me to. Is this appropriate?
If I could just read the undue burden criteria, I think that would help to focus the commissioner's thoughts. The proposed use does not impose an undue burden on any public improvements, facilities, utilities, or services available to the area. So what might be helpful for the people who have to write the findings is if you could have a discussion about specific public improvements that the application would burden, if possible.
My comments
Or
were regarding
facilities or utilities or services.
services is what mine were specifically.
Right, okay, so I've heard a lot of discussion tonight that I would say characterizes a lot of frustration with the county and the lack of county funding and services. But the job tonight is to explain why the application that's proposed would unduly burden those public improvements and facilities. And so
Okay,
if we could refocus away from anything that's lacking in the county services right now and focus on the application and how that would unduly burden public services, those would be good findings.
can I try?
Yes, sure.
So again, P15,
Maybe,
oh,
Yes.
okay.
but I'm just,
Just go.
I just wanted to comment, and you're welcome to go down this path if we want to do that, but I felt that your findings really defined what we're talking about. Was that burden to services?
Mhm.
I wasn't sure how we would expand on what I felt were very conclusive already.
Yeah,
Unless you had something else you wanted to say. I don't want to say that you can't, but I felt that those findings were very explicit and could easily be captured for this,
right.
whatever you're putting together for next week, right?
And this is, I appreciate that. I appreciate all of this, but the point of, let me make it sure, I know I don't get to do it very often, but, so we have a motion, okay? And so the conversation should be either in support of or not in support of that motion. And we're trying to guide this conversation, so not just have an open conversation about, well, the world anymore, to say, this is how I can support this motion, because I believe that the application falls short in this way in relation to this criteria. That's what we get to do at this point. Okay?
Okay,
Okay?
okay.
I feel able to do that. Start with what he said. The application relies on conditions of approval to make the application approvable, make the application acceptable as a land use decision. However, the conditions, many of the conditions of approval need to be rewritten in very specific terms that would require expertise that I don't think any of us here have, or that would fill gaps in, that would make them enforceable. So for instance, P15 is a fairly good example. It says applicant must provide copies of DEQ permits from the last 10 years to the county prior to beginning site preparation or grading activities. Where? What does it do? What the county? What does the county do with it? What's the point? P15B says the applicant shall prepare the stormwater report and all related designs. Prepare it and do what with it?
But can I ask a guiding question?
Yes,
Are you proposing that we rewrite those conditions of approval?
I'm
Or are
proposing that
you,
we are unable to.
okay, so,
There's a really good one. It's OP12. It's about fire, of course. It says applicant shall maintain a log of all fire incidents and give them to DSAC. DSAC doesn't exist. Applicant shall report all fire incidents to DEQ. How does that mitigate fire? It has nothing, it does nothing except report. Reporting is not mitigation.
so in your opinion, the conditions of approval are inadequate to mitigate the negative impact of the proposal
Exactly.
in those specific instances.
And I can provide others.
I'm just trying to get, okay, Commissioner Biscoe.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hayman. Might I propose, if we're looking at a summary of statements, if you will, to support the motion as presented to deny the application to Commissioner Lee's unenforceability topic, might I propose a merging of some of what she said and a little teeny bit of a trail more, which is the application relies on conditions of approval to make the application acceptable, maybe a different word there, as a land use decision. However, as presented, many conditions of approval as written are unenforceable or failing to provide enforceability that would allow this application to comply with criteria. Is that where we're headed? We're looking for statements that will support this motion.
I'm not sure if it's sufficient enough to,
It would be better if we could go through just the three criteria in 53-215, and if you all could reach consensus on whether you think that the application seriously interferes with adjacent uses with respect to noise, for example, or odor and traffic and water quality. And that would give us some bases for denial.
And
And the reason isn't because, I want to keep you here till 11 o'clock at night, but it's because if this does get appealed to the Board of Commissioners, it's very helpful to them to know exactly or as clearly as possible why the Planning Commission thought that the application should be denied. And also it's somewhat of a legal requirement to let the applicant know what they could try to do better to get the application approved. Or there's something that's so fatal that it will never be approved. And that is more if the case goes to LUBA, but it should be in the back of our minds.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Sure.
Yeah, quick point of order. So we just went through a long set of quoting all these different
Right.
codes and stuff like that. Do you want us to re-quote all those codes?
That's why I did my motion the way I did.
Yeah.
Well, no, because that's.
No,
the way the
that,
motion is
that,
written.
seriously, I had a narrow one, 53-220, right? And do I have to restate it at this
Right.
point, just 10 minutes later?
Yeah.
I do.
Mhm.
sorry, excuse me.
No,
Okay, let me see.
it
if
just seems kind of,
Is it fair to say that all of the commissioners think that the application meets none of the criteria? Is that a
Are
fair
you asking us
statement?
to vote?
I'm just sort of taking a poll informally. It would
Within relation to 53.215, I would.
want serious interference with adjacent uses, I already forget them. Serious interference with the character of the area and undue burden on public
Yes.
facilities and services.
Yes.
The application meets not a single one of those criteria.
That's what I've heard.
Yes,
tonight.
that's what I would prefer.
And so
Consider.
the next thing I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to be your favorite person by the end of the night, is to explain a little bit on the record, the evidence that why you assigned more weight to certain evidence over other. You're obviously assigning very little weight to the applicant's evidence. I think that's a fair characterization.
I disagree with you making that characterization.
Okay,
actually.
so please go ahead. Because one thing that we need to do is show that you have weighed the evidence and
Mhm.
there is a lot of evidence in the record.
Mhm.
It's mostly way over my head, but
it's a lot.
there is some evidence that is highly, very much addresses some of the very highly technical aspects, and there's other evidence that also addresses some technical aspects. And so are you rejecting as credible some evidence and giving more credibility to other evidence?
Yes,
Okay,
Oh,
there
well,
we go.
wait, oh, sorry.
that's what I am anyway.
Are we gonna roundtable this, raise hand? How would you like Vice Chair
It's too
Heyman
easy
for
on
us to
Zoom.
engage?
So, again, we're trying to put together a sensible basis for a motion.
Mhm.
Okay, that's really what we're trying to do here. Okay, we have a motion on the table. We need to say, we are voting to deny this application for these 5 very specific reasons. Okay,
My testimony has all that.
well,
Great.
A quick point of order. So I crafted my response
mhm,
that specifically in mind.
yes,
And I did it during the roundtable, which I thought we were collecting that information. For me to restate it, I could just give you the document.
So your
It's very
your,
specific.
basis for denial is 53.215.1
1, 2.
It's,
and 2,
yeah,
And you had another one?
and
yeah,
that.
which is seriously interfere with the use of adjacent property.
Okay,
And it alters the character of the area or unduly burdens public facilities.
okay, so let's start with the
Which one?
use of the adjacent property. So could
Could
you,
I go back perhaps to my question,
Sure.
Chair, Vice Chair? Okay, first, is Chair Fowler not joining us? I did not.
Is he still on?
No, I'm on and I just asked to be unmuted if I might make a couple of comments.
Now you are free to do so, Chairman Fowler.
And to Commissioner Fulford's point, this is kind of a repeat of my opening comments, but I think it fulfills what our obligation is to be very specific. If we are going to bring this motion to a vote, we want to be very specific as to the areas of deficiency with respect to either subsection 1, subsection 2, or subsection 3. So my concern in subsection 1, which is interference with uses on the property, was odor. And I found that the model had inherent limitations that were admitted by the applicant, inherent limitations associated with topography and microclimate, and could not be reconciled with the overwhelming public input that odor was a serious interference to their peaceful enjoyment of their property and to their ability to hire, retain workers on agricultural lands and so forth. So that's a serious interference for me. And I haven't heard in our deliberations mitigation sufficiently to overcome that my objection. The second serious interference in my mind was noise. And we had testimony that the noise from blasting was interrupting the livelihood of a livestock farmer and equestrian trainer. That is serious interference, and I've yet to hear any proposed condition that would mitigate that interference. In terms of subsection 2, it doesn't impose an undue burden. My issue on subsection 2 has to do with water quality, specifically PFAS. And I have not seen in the record anything other than the risks of PFAS. I have not seen how to mitigate those risks with a condition of approval. And so that is, for me, an undue burden on facilities. And then the other area in subsection 2 that I am concerned about is the general area of, is this operation too complex to be effectively monitored, managed, and effectively managed by our local county government, our state enforcement agencies, and our federal enforcement agencies. So those were my areas that I would need. Those are currently deficient in my mind in the application. And in order to get over that deficiency, there would either need to be a condition of approval that met with my acceptance, or I would have to vote to deny.
Thank you, Chair Feller. That's just a great way to get it going. Can I ask you one question about the undue burden on the county systems? Do I understand that to be that the applicant's late proposed condition to fund a county compliance and enforcement position is not sufficient in your mind?
I very much appreciate the applicant's response and putting that in. I am on the fence as to whether it's sufficient, because to a couple of my other commissioners' points, monitoring is the first step. It is not the end-all be-all in terms of effectively managing the risks. And so that is, admittedly, that's an area that I continue to ponder, whether it is sufficient to mitigate the undue burden.
Okay.
Commissioner Wilson.
So in line with that, my concern is that because I'm a resident of Adair, we rely on the Adair Rural Fire and Rescue And they are the only responding agency locally to any fires in the area. It's the 18 square miles as indicated in their public testimony that supports us. It is a volunteer rural and fire rescue department. And my concern is that in terms of undue burden, that any activity, both on the south side and on the working face of the existing landfill, that any fires that may occur, or fires that, especially on the southern expansion zone, where there's a forest conservation zone, which is close to it is a forested area, that any type of wildfire that could be created by the activities of the applicant in the southern zone or from the working phase would place, both an undue burden on our own rural and fire rescue department to the point where it puts our own residents at risk because they're not available because of the demands of the working phase of the landfill and of the southern expansion. There's blasting, there's all of the emissions from the working phase of the landfill, all the risks that are associated with fires and potential wildfires are present at that point. And I don't know, I think that in their subsequent or closing application, they indicated that they would add a second working water truck. And while I commend that, I don't know that that's sufficient to mitigate the impacts and the burden upon our very rural fire and rescue department.
Thank you.
Commissioner
That's very
Wilson.
helpful. Thank
Very,
you.
very specific. Thank you. Commissioner Lee.
Think I can do this. So I have my list. 53 to 15.1, groundwater interruption would seriously interfere with uses on adjacent property and the applicant's plan is inadequate to prevent or mitigate. They have used conflicting information. They presented conflicting information about the character of the fractured bedrock. They have made assumptions about the southern area based on information modeling done on the northern area, but they haven't finished the work on to characterize the southern area. So they have not proven, they have failed the burden of proof on groundwater interruption. On groundwater and groundwater interruption would be permanent and irreversible and would completely destroy the value of homes and farms.
Thank you.
And
Clear.
I have several of them. I can keep going if you want me to, unless Ed wants to do one. Oh, we haven't figured out how to.
I've got one.
Yeah.
All right.
Go for
it. So incompatibility with the evolving character of the area.
Okay, so let's see, it's
We're
the
53.
it's the serious interference with the character of the area. So am I understanding when you say incompatibility, you mean serious interference?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Urban and rural residential areas have expanded, making the land use increasingly incompatible. The landfill is no longer isolated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Use the knife.
We all need to.
Not close
let's all
enough,
learn
was
to
it?
use our knives better. Yeah.
So probably going,
Were you going to repeat?
Do you want me to
I need
repeat?
better hearing aids.
okay, there we go. The juices are flowing.
All right.
Are you going to repeat?
That, no. that's
No?
good.
Okay. My God, my list is way too long. So undue burden, I'm going to talk about bioaggregation or accumulation of PFAS and other gas emission or particulate matter toxins. I think that falls under undue burden and seriously interfere.
Okay, so that's an undue burden on public facilities.
I don't have that list. I wished we had that.
Okay,
kind of-
undue burden on public improvements, facilities, utilities, or services in the area.
Okay, let's stick with then seriously interfere.
And then seriously interfere with is with adjacent uses and character of the area.
So impacts, this would be to farms, quality of life, because it's so personal use and or production, the bioaccumulation or bioaggregation of heavy metal toxins, PFAS, unknown contaminants in produce and livestock. I
Okay.
see no plan that was not addressed. It's in testimony, but it was not addressed by the applicant. And unknown means to mitigate.
Commissioner Brothers? No.
Wait,
Oh,
there's another-
I think you've all at least picked the one that I.
Well, I was going to add another one because it relates to Commissioner Bisco's point about the biosolids or Commissioner Chair Fowler's points about the PFAS in terms of a public utility. Adair operates its own water system, providing water to the residents of Adair. That water is drawn from the Willamette River, and the additional solids, the additional pollutants that could be created by expanding the landfill to the southern face, increasing the amount of leachate, which Commissioner Bisco spoke to. That leachate has to be treated, and if it's treated at any public waste treatment utility, that places an undue burden on that waste treatment utility, and it also places an undue burden on Adair's water treatment plant if the waste treatment of that leachate enters the Willamette River downstream. Upstream. Thank you.
All
Thank
of it
you.
is upstream.
Upstream from us, and our capacity to be able to provide clean and safe drinking water to our residents in Adair. So.
Could you also add undue burden to the transportation infrastructure because that waste is hauled offsite?
It is.
That
It is currently, and so that traffic is, that if there's an increase in the traffic on the roadways of transporting that leachate from the working face of the landfill and an expanded, the expansion area, that would be, I assume a twofold, I don't know the amounts, but somewhere an increased amount of leachate production that would have to be treated. And so therefore more trucks transporting and addressing the issues about traffic and public safety on the highways.
Can I ask about if there's consensus on the meaning of undue burden? Because a lot of what, of the reasons for denial given have been that these things will happen and they will be bad. But the code says undue burden. And so I would like to go back to that phrase and make sure that the planning commission is focusing on the fact that it's not, that is in fact an undue burden. It is, I would say, paraphrase and say significant, or I can't find that page in the staff.
I have it
report.
right here. So I like this part really well. It says, burden on public infrastructure and service is likely undue if it overloads the system or causes significant degradation in terms of quality, effectiveness, timeliness of infrastructure or service. Lesser burdens may be undue if the effect jeopardizes people's health, safety, or welfare. Burdens that the county has typically not considered undue include those that can be mitigated through things like conditions of approval, blah-de-blah-de-blah. For planned improvements to be relied upon in determining if a burden is not undue, the implementation of those improvements must be certain. In other words, if an undue burden jeopardizes people's health, safety, or welfare, any mitigation must be certain.
Commissioner Lee, and you're reading that
From the first staff report.
the source of that definition
It's
is?
the BCC formal work group polling LLU F-9C, a unanimous finding from BCC.
So I can't ask anybody on this planning commission, but my recollection was that there was concern about the fact that the legal land use subcommittee, which was comprised of Benton County legal counsel Vance Croney, 2 Republic Services representatives, lawyers, excuse me, and 1 member of the Benton County Talks Trash Work Group were predefining the definition of undue burden, whereas in this testimony in the record, we have also read that that's not only not allowable, that deference is given to this group to quote unquote define, in this case, undue burden, but also referring to not a legal definition, because it is not a legal defined term.
Mhm.
It is in fact a general, pick up a certain dictionary. I think it was Mr. Kleinman's testimony that referred to this specifically. My concern is that if we are using this because it was presented in the staff report, not considering or giving weight to the fact that there's no legal basis for us to take the Benton County Talks Trash Legal Land Use Subcommittee predefined definition, a deference given to this group, that we are already off track in defining undue burden ahead of this land use process.
Okay,
Hmm?
I like this definition.
I'm not saying I disagree with that.
We'd like to.
So procedurally speaking, that was a very significant point of contention.
Okay.
I don't have the consensus statistics for that. I actually thought we struck the definite predefined on undue burden. I thought we struck it from Benton County Talks Trash, but I may be misremembering. I do not, and I'm certain I'm certain I'm not misrepresenting the concern about predefining a term that's not a legal term in advance of a land use application hearing.
Are you?
I
So
think that the
the-
planning commission can define the words undue burden. They're not defined in the code. We would do that by looking at the dictionary definition of the word undue and the dictionary definition of the word burden, which it's my understanding that Benton County Talks Trash kind of did, and it's
And
making me
again,
crazy that I can't find this in the staff report.
I disagree with that position
Okay.
as a member of Benton County Talks
Well,
Trash.
So that's just what the staff report says.
I am, but because we're using that as a basis of testimony and record here, the weight that we give to that discussion does matter here. You're correct. Thank you, Commissioner Struthers. My concern is, again, the deference given to this body at this time should not be relying on the legal land use subcommittee definition of undue burden in the Benton County Talks Trash process, of which it was contested.
Let me approach it a different way. Does the planning commission accept the characterization of the meaning of the phrase undue burden that is included in both the first staff report and the supplemental staff report as a consensus?
Is that the definition that Commissioner Lee just read?
Yes.
I do not. I don't accept the constraints to only that definition.
Do you want to propose a different definition?
Well, if I had been prepared to propose a different definition in this process, I might have a better one to offer
Right.
at this moment. I object to us using that narrowly to define undue burden for this process.
So just getting back to the reason that I asked is that the identification of interferences and burdens has been very specific, but the code language refers to serious interferences and undue burdens. And so I wanted to suss out that so that Pedro can furiously type again. So I think,
I have a proposal.
yes,
For undue burden, a situation where requirement or action is excessively difficult, costly or impractical to fulfill, effectively preventing or significantly hindering someone from exercising a right or fulfilling an obligation.
That sounds like a dictionary to me.
You like it?
You like that?
Okay.
Fine, whatever.
Great.
Works.
Fine, whatever. Is that?
It works.
I like this one a little better.
I like them both.
I just want to make
It's
sure
a reference.
it has a reference that
Yeah,
does work for
okay.
me.
All right.
And then the definition of, excuse me, the proposed interpretation of the phrase serious interference.
Okay, well, even the staff report couldn't nail that down.
Okay, so this is gonna,
Sorry.
the staff report summarized the BCCT exercise and also summarized, took a look at other prior decisions within the county that have applied the serious interference standard and summarized what those decisions, thought it meant.
And do we have record on when that definition has survived challenge or not?
It has not,
Okay, so it has never been challenged.
has never been challenged.
Okay.
Okay,
So it does not define, sir.
Vice Chair Heyman,
yes,
might I offer from the record Mr. Kleinman's testimony, who references a LUBA case, Stop the Dump Coalition versus Yamhill County. Another case dealing with proposed expansion of a landfill. LUBA examined the meaning of significant, which is part of our discussion here. There's a little more after this also. Because the term significant is undefined and of common usage, it is permissible to consult dictionary definitions. The most pertinent definition of significant in Webster's Third New International Dictionary, there's citations here, which I won't read, appears to be having or likely to have influence or effect, deserving to be considered. Because ORS 215-296 is framed in the negative, the applicant must demonstrate that the proposed use will not force a significant change. This goes to the statutory part of this process. It seems appropriate to consider related acronyms such as the term insignificant, et cetera, et cetera. The above discussion sets out the most accurate and appropriate definition for the Planning Commission to apply. In summary, seriously equals to a serious extent, serious equals significant, equals likely to have influence or effect, and deserving to be considered equals not of little size or importance. So this cites a LUBA case reference. So the Land Use Board of Appeals, for those that might not know, this group probably does, but everyone might not know what that is. It's a legal precedent establishing that definition.
I was only going, oh, sorry.
Dump was a case that involved the farm impacts test, which is not, this is the county's own code provision, not the farm impacts
But
test.
the county does not define significant, seriously interfere. And we are talking about the definition of,
Your local code. So you have a
We're-
lot of discretion.
we are, yes, including considering the Land Use Board of Appeals definition acceptance of the word significant and serious.
And serious.
So what I'm hearing Commissioner Bisco say is we could accept the LUBA definition if we wanted to.
I would add it in addition to.
It's not the same phrase.
Right.
No, it isn't.
It is.
I mean, you could say serious interference, we think means the same thing as significant
Significant.
impact.
Mhm. Or significant disruption.
Or just significant.
Well, the statute that is at issue there is a significant impact. That's the phrase.
Okay, all
So
right.
serious interference,
Okay.
significant impact, and you could say, we're gonna go ahead and equate those two.
In the first staff report, I did note on page 18
Mhm.
that they do quote from the BCTT about how they felt to define seriously interfere,
Mhm.
but again, I was not a part of that, and I don't know if that was by consensus or if it was just by acclamation.
I don't know where that is in the record presently. I do know that that was of concern, that it was predefined.
Hmm.
And I think that's the issue in this discussion. I do like Commissioner Fulford's proposed addition perhaps, or just definition with addition to what we have just talked about from LUBA, because that's very broad
And it gives
and it's
us,
defining
and-
undue burden.
and right, and it identifies for us the criteria that we're providing So I would agree.
So now that we have the definitions, we can just go backwards and all of the concerns that you all summarized, you feel meet both of those definitions, undue burden and serious interference.
Yes.
They're not just burdens, they're undue, and they're not just interference, it's serious. Okay.
Is that a consensus?
Well, I said yes.
What about? Yes.
Yeah, like a 2-second break, so
Hmm?
can I talk to staff?
Sure. Oh, we're gonna just.
2 seconds. Okay.
You can take more than 2 seconds.
Commissioner Lee, this is actually the process that answers the question you asked earlier is what will the commission use in reviewing an appeal? This is what we're doing right now, answering that question.
I see that, and my
Right.
statement is based on that.
Has to be,
Several.
I understand
Does it have to be verbal? It has to be verbal rather than written for their record or? Well, is it
the only thing that the commission's gonna get our decision and the basis for our.
Maybe that won't happen.
Okay.
That would that.
Right. Well, and we're adding content to that right now. That's what we're doing.
Okay.
Assuming you're actually going to vote on this eventually, so.
Do we need a recess?
What?
Do we need to take a break here?
You want another break?
I'm
Actually,
trying to figure out if that's what.
There's a bit thing. Okay.
All right.
Staff is convincing with legal content. How's that? Okay. So just a reminder, just a reminder, okay, we're trying to substantiate our rationale for the motion on the table, which is to deny, okay? That is what we're trying to do, and we are interacting with legal counsel to try to get that as clear as possible so that should this be, whatever we do, with appeals, the basis for our decision will be clear. Okay, and clearly reference to specific issues of compliance with the code. Okay, that's it.
May I provide either one more or additional, whatever.
Yeah.
I would like to amend my first one. My first one was groundwater interruption seriously interferes with uses on adjacent property and the applicant plan is inadequate to prevent or mitigate. So that was based on characterization of the south expansion based on assumptions from the north and on this conflicting assumptions about the character of bedrock. Now, in addition to that, I stated that this is serious because dewatering of someone's domestic well is permanent and irreversible. I also noted that OP 13A1 is inadequate to prevent serious interference and proposes unknown mitigation after the fact if it occurs. A1 proposes that adjacent property owners must prove that their water loss is due to the expansion and not climate or other factors, but without prior baseline data, it may be impossible to satisfy the applicant, nor does the condition of approval provide any thresholds to use as an acceptable measure of proof for that, nor have the applicant made any effort to gather baseline data themselves for comparison after the construction, even though they've had time to do so. The applicant's mitigation plan in OP 13 does not specify the frequency of monitoring other than that it is regular, nor does it specify how it will determine the baseline established prior to excavation, since the wells will not be installed until after the excavation. These absences make the condition of approval essentially unenforceable as a mitigation measure. I can give this to you online whatever. So the rest of mine are all like that, where I have used the code language, described my concerns, described how the, what does P stand for? OP and P1, anyway.
Operating.
Conditions of approval for operating and preliminary.
P is phase one, phase
Phase,
two.
okay,
Right.
whatever. So I've got those here in writing, if you want me to continue now.
We've got that one.
Shall I go on, or do you want to, are we doing round robin? I haven't figured this out.
I think we've got about 3 or 4 bases for denial.
Okay.
Always better than one.
Yeah.
But I can give you several more. I'd like them to be included.
Yes.
Groundwater contamination from leachate seriously interferes with uses on adjacent property and with the character of the area.
Okay,
Based on the absence of,
how does it seriously interfere? Groundwater contamination from leachate, if it happens, would interfere with uses on adjacent property? Like, it's gonna go into the wells, is what you're saying?
yes, it's going
Okay.
to contaminate wells, it's going to contaminate the river, it's going to contaminate the watershed.
So evidence shows that it has in some instances already. It's not an if.
Well, E.E. Wilson is the wildlife area right across the highway
Yes.
from the working phase of landfill, and I
Has testing been done? Do
I
evaluation?
don't know.
Analysis? We know the Willamette River and other rivers or river in testimony has documented PFAS contamination. We know that there's groundwater contamination already surrounding the landfill. It's not an if question.
It was.
It
in
is potential
testimony.
expansion,
Right.
yes,
So that's how.
increasing.
So I oppose, so I'm saying leachate has long-term impacts on adjacent property and the character of the area because it's toxic.
Because it'll impact the wells.
Health, safety, and well-being.
Yeah, but OP 13B proposes to mitigate these risks by monitoring arsenic in sentinel wells. But this condition of approval is inadequate for 4 reasons. The condition does not specify how changes in arsenic will be attributed to the landfill operation versus other factors. The presence or absence of arsenic has been a source of conflicting interpretation, and other contaminants are more certainly to come from the landfill, and they should be used instead. The OP 13B quote, "The sampling program will begin before landfill construction. This activity should become a preliminary condition of approval. It should not be an operating condition of approval." And
On that, just thinking about even the optics is trying to conflate the what you think is inadequate with the conditions might just be a moot point, and focusing on the denial itself as opposed to what you think is inadequate about the conditions will make it a cleaner set of findings. So using the content without the context of the conditions, I think would be more effective.
that
makes
I'm
sense.
sorry, it didn't, I got a little confused.
As opposed to using the inadequacy of the proposed conditions as a reference point for the denial, use the other evidence as the
Right.
point of denial.
The other evidence, okay,
Mhm.
so
So don't worry about the inadequacy of the conditions at this point. We've passed that stage.
I'm just saying they're unenforceable.
Correct.
But we don't have.
And we've established
We
that
don't-
generally, we don't need to get into the specificity of that.
Shut up, in other words,
in a
shut up
serious
and move on, yeah, okay.
Okay.
The
So-
problem is the leachate in the water, which damages, yeah.
So
And it's not
agree.
mitigated.
there's 2 issues here, though. We're mixing arsenic, which is a different issue than PFAS,
Right.
leachate and PFAS. We have 2 separate
Yeah.
groundwater contamination issues that I think should be identified in what is being put together here.
Right.
That arsenic discussion and basalt versus rhyolitic I forget which geologic
Yeah,
feature.
I didn't catch.
That's a different discussion than leachate, PFAS, and otherwise groundwater contamination.
So 53, 215, 1 and 2, wildfire risks seriously interfere with uses on adjacent property with the character of the area and provide an undue burden on services because
That relates to Commissioner Wilson's concern about the burden on the fire department.
Their rural.
The volunteer.
fire
Right, the volunteer fire department.
exactly, but also because their consultant did not include wind-blown embers from fires off-site in their mitigation plan. That's a deficiency in the applicant's presentation and something that they might be interested in amending.
And the fire risk reported by Adair Rural Fire and Rescue were far greater than what was presented in the application.
Right.
And then you, if I may, you also had additional evidence, I believe, that was provided as testimony where you had some numbers specific to crashes, to fires in the area.
Yep.
So there was some evidence.
It's a chart.
Which you're
Yeah.
done.
I think so.
Okay.
These are significant, yes, that's what we were talking about.
How many, you don't want any more? I can quit, whatever you want.
So I just, for point of clarification, if we are not including the concerns brought by this body in totality, this under an appeal scenario goes to the Board of Commissioners. They will not consider then the other concerns that this body has brought forward if it's not in this document or summary that we are correct.
Oh, no, it's de novo. What they're doing is de novo. They will
They will start over new.
Your considerations, but they will also be using their own process to review all of the documentation, all of their consideration, and make.
And the public hearings.
Yeah.
Including this one.
Okay, including this.
Including this.
Yes.
So to be clear again, we are not being asked to present the full body of our concerns and reasons for denial. And they will yet still be considering all of the full reasons that were presented in this hearing today, this deliberation.
The Board of Commissioners it reviews it de novo, so it's essentially a new review of the application. So it doesn't review the Planning Commission's decision per se,
Right.
under any kind of deferential standard of review,
I'm-
but it is in the record.
Yes, so I'm concerned then,
Mhm.
why are we defining any criteria for denial when we've already made opening statements that kind of sort of define that? If it's not going to be considered in an appeal before the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, because if the applicant decides to appeal the denial, they need to know the bases on which the application was denied.
Right,
So
those are the reasons they wouldn't.
I understand that.
right.
You know,
But we're
And
not
it'd have to be in
providing,
writing.
so we are not, so here's the sticky thing about Benton County Talks Trash COP reviews for 50 years. It wasn't in writing,
Mhm.
quote unquote. It wasn't enforceable, these conditions, even though they were there because we didn't cross the T and dot the I. And that's part of this narrative around, well, those conditions didn't really apply and we think that you were in compliance at such and such a points. This is important to be clarified here. If we do not clarify our reasoning for denial, have we provided the record in writing, as you just said, that we need to provide?
Next week, there are going to be written findings that we'll be preparing, summarizing the decisions, including the bases for denial.
And so that.
That's our
just a
reason
point of order.
That
reality.
So, well, just clarification, so. What the record we have created tonight during our deliberations will be prepared for next week, which we
Vote on.
which we also then vote on.
To
Again,
adopt the decision. And
so we adopt the decision that we make tonight.
And that's what I understood.
Yes.
But now I'm questioning, why are we providing any summaries right now then, if you're going to synthesize our conversations this evening in this deliberation?
I can
I feel
offer
like
that
I'm going
information.
to-
I believe that we are providing them with what we think are the most salient points for them, not everything, but most salient points for them to incorporate into the actual document which we address.
Okay,
A week
Vice
from now.
Chair, then may I provide some more salient points that I would like incorporated into this document?
I guess you can. I'm of the opinion that the strength of an individual point is diminished when it's in the context of 100 points. So,
And a counter to that, right? If we have 100 points and they're all strong, but we only show 5, then we're not really making the true point of the document, right?
Amen.
you can do it.
Okay.
I'm just one point.
No, I'm doing it different.
Don't just.
I can't hear you.
Good kid.
Not yet. We haven't. No, we haven't.
Like it's too soon?
We spent 3 hours, right?
May I then,
You
in
can
the
do.
interest of continuing so that we go home at a reasonable hour this evening, hopefully. Then I would like and find it very important, provided in testimony in the record, the methane gas emissions and the plume maps, methane gas, hydrogen sulfide.
Okay, so is this serious interference with adjacent uses or the character of the
This would
area?
be adjacent, serious interference.
Okay.
Yes.
With the community, sorry.
And that is, and undefined. So, and the application has not only not responded to that testimony, there's nothing in the record that shows that it's being evaluated, analyzed or evaluated for impact. So it's an unknown. Additionally, the quality or lack thereof or quantity of the components of what is actually going to this landfill, but public testimony to actually draw out for this record. It was not conclusive in BCTT to the extent that it exists. It was also not conclusive in this hearing process. So the unknown waste, what's the word, components, the waste materials creates an unknown risk. The applicant has not provided the evidence of how do I want to say this? Applicant's not provided what's going into the landfill, but also therefore cannot provide any source of mitigation. And the record.
Still on the methane?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
You're talking
What's
solid waste.
well, yes, solid and liquid waste.
Unidentified solid.
Mm.
Unidentified.
So identified and unidentified. So we're hearing livestock carcasses. That wasn't in the record and except a testimony, but I know that that came up as well as hazardous materials in BCTT. So
So, sorry, is that undue burden?
that
or
would
serious
be
interference?
undue burden
Undue
and
burden.
seriously interfere because the waste components, including radioactive materials, impacts the leachate, impacts the seriously
things.
interfere.
Okay.
Yes. So this is both I would propose. There is no proposed mitigation to not only manage this adequately, but to predict and mitigate risk, future risk of, and expansion would increase that future risk.
I have some more. Is it my turn? So I have the 30,000 foot level undue burden on Benton County's government services. And the evidence is that Benton County government did not engage in institutional learning because it did not provide in the staff report conditions of approval that could be enforced, because Benton County does not monitor conditions of approval because it lacks capacity. Because Benton County doesn't include wildfire risks in the community wildfire protection plan because it lacks the capacity to do so. Benton County ignores BCC 77.401 because it lacks the capacity to do so. Benton County.
Commissioner Lee, can I ask you, so is it the criterion asks, does the application unduly burden public facilities or services. But,
Unduly burdening the Benton County government.
okay, I'm sorry, but, and then what you said is the county lacks a wildfire plan and the county doesn't have proper staffing.
Hmm.
So how, so walk me through how the application causes those things.
I'm saying the application results in an undue burden. Yeah, isn't that clear?
It seems to me like what you're saying is that the existing conditions are very poor and the application is going to make them even worse.
Could I comment?
Yes.
So I don't think that's what it says at all. I think it's very clear and that undue burdens exist because of not just this application as it sits here today, but this process. As planning commissioners, we have sat for years now and heard that we're going to do this aspirationally. We're going to do community outreach. We're going to do comprehensive plans. What has happened is this has become all consuming. The amount of training, the amount of focus on this process is in fact the reality of that burden. It's not just this hearing tonight. It's not just this application moving forward. It's the whole process of this application and how it has impacted Benton County's capacity.
Yeah.
So does not.
Yeah.
The
Control
applicant,
that.
just because they have exercised their right to apply for the application
Or-
is not a burden on the county. That is their right for the county to provide that service.
But the expansion is, if it were to be approved.
I understand.
It's been articulated is that you're saying the things that the county has been inadequate in doing previously will potentially be exacerbated by the application, but we're not able to say, to bring into what the county has done previously and their actions. That's not fair to the applicant.
No, what I'm saying is that if the application were approved, Benton County is not stepping up to its responsibility because it can't. Because it lacks the capacity to do so.
But that's not necessarily
That's
true
sub-
statement.
Yeah, it's
Or it
subjective.
chooses not to, or whatever. I'm saying it.
Well, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah. Let's not.
Sorry, well, I knew this one was kind of weird and potentially not.
Well, it's been a reoccurring issue through all this conversation, but if I understand it correctly, I've had some is whatever inadequacies we perceive in the county, they can't be used against the application itself.
Right.
No, and
That's a good way to say it.
I'm not trying to say the application, it's against the application. I'm saying if the application were to be approved,
But you're presenting an argument to disapprove an application, and the argument is based on the inadequacy of the county, which is not
okay,
Not a position.
which can't be done.
it's okay, it's okay.
I'm just saying it's, okay.
I knew that it's not salad, that it's okay.
To Commissioner Lee's point, the county saying that there are no plans to enforce current conditions of approval. Could that not be interpreted as there are also no plans to enforce? Since we don't know what those conditions of approval would be. Staff capacity has been part of this testimony. And the expansion has brought up the concerns of staff capacity to manage this expansion. Is that not to this point as well? That has occurred in this testimony.
My understanding is that can't be used as a basis for denial.
Right.
That's my understanding.
Management of conditions of approval and the capacity of the county to
I
do
think it's
so.
within the possibility, whether for the county to choose to do what it's supposed to do.
But that's why I used the definition that I liked, because that would have to take place with certainty in an undue, in a situation involving an undue burden. It's because I'm suggesting this undue burden is undue because it jeopardizes health, safety, and general welfare, or whatever the terms are. That's why I liked it, but it just gets to be a word salad and I don't want
Is
to
it-
argue about it.
Is it possible for Commissioner Lee to consider what she's trying to synthesize and forward it to staff for our consideration next week?
The record is closed.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's not,
we can't take anything that's not.
Okay, can you synthesize what she has said to an extent then in her record?
I cannot because it's not an appropriate basis for denial. So I would not include that.
Okay.
I just have a point of order.
Sure.
Vice Chair Hammond, do we, at this point, do we have enough basis? Have we articulated enough of a basis for denial to consider a vote?
I believe we have.
Okay.
Could I add one more that I think is very salient and it's very short? Vice Chair, thank you. In the testimony and in this record is the statement, according to the USGS publication, has noted that the EPA has concluded that all landfills eventually will leak into the environment. I think that's relevant. The applicant has not provided any mitigations for such a scenario from cells 1 and 1A are not online, but every cell subsequently since is theoretically been lined and all future expansions should be as well. If we have recognition by experts on these topics that all landfills eventually will leak into the environment, it seems to me that's relevant.
What's the reference in terms of code?
That would be undue burden and seriously interfere. So leaking leachate into the environment, toxins, heavy metals, dioxins.
Right, I just,
So the fact that we've acknowledged in this record that all landfills will eventually leak seems to me an imminent and relevant discussion to consider when we're looking at expanding our risk through this expansion.
I have a few more that are real quick. In the interest of Ed's comment that serious.
so I want to ask a general question here. There are some of us who believe we have enough. There are some of us who want to be exhausted. So I'd like to have some sort of consensus around, because I think we have enough to support this. I think you share that perspective. I'm just trying to decide, when do we stop?
Could we clarify again from council what? So I hear de novo, the appeal, it'll be a de novo review. What we're providing is important, but then we don't really have to provide it all. Could we get more, just a recap of that, please? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so this is an important juncture, right? So the planning commission decision is going to hopefully have a lot of weight with the Board of Commissioners, but they're also responsible for starting at the very beginning of the process, reading the entire record. So taking into consideration and coming to their own conclusions as well. So what you put in the denial and its specificity is probably less relevant than the general reasoning, like we started the process, as Chair Fowler had pointed out. Odor, there is copious evidence around odor, copious evidence around
Noise.
noise and things of that nature. So just citing the evidence in a summary statement of the denial is sufficient, in my professional opinion.
Okay, and is traffic on that list?
I know you've spoken to that, but I don't think we put the transportation analysis there yet.
And just to clarify again, this de novo process is different than an appeal process, or are they the same and
It's
labeled?
the same
Because I've,
Process triggers their de novo
Okay.
process.
Right.
and should there be an appeal of their decision, it then goes to,
The Land Use Board of Appeals.
so it goes to LUBA, not a circuit court.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. If we could add traffic to that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay,
Got that.
so traffic is under.
That could be it.
Oh.
We haven't voted yet.
It would be seriously interfere with adjacent property, but also undue burden on the infrastructure.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Commissioner Fulford.
I'd like to move to allow Commissioner Lee her last 2 points.
Two, only two?
You
Is
said
that-
two.
Is that a
I
motion?
said I had a few.
No.
Oh, I thought you said
Is it a
two.
motion?
Okay, I can limit it to two. One of them
Okay.
is, thank you. impacts the character of the area related to housing. So that's impact to the character of the area.
As in seriously interferes with the character of the area.
The character of the area due to conflicting housing, which is what Ed said, and I'm not sure if that's been summarized yet.
Okay, so what you mean by housing is there are more houses?
The community's growing out.
The changing character of the area, and then Commissioner Fuller's comment.
Where do I put this? The expansion impacts housing growth potential for the area due at least to the noise, odor, litter, and general industrial character. The applicant didn't consider these in relationship to the character of the area. And then I'll just do this last one, litter. Seriously interferes with uses on adjacent property, documented hazards to livestock. That's it.
Danger to livestock, and also it's an undue burden on the county that as how do I put this? It is necessary to provide a service on a regular basis to clean up the litter that is distributed along the highway towards the landfill.
You're talking about
Litter control.
99,
Yeah,
mainly
on 99.
around there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's highway and also airborne, correct?
Yeah, well, and that would be the danger to livestock because it's airborne and danger to the. Yes, right.
There's a lot of, that one could go a lot of ways.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
If
I
everybody's
know.
ready.
So we have a motion on the table and a second.
Mhm.
And you've had discussion.
What?
You've had discussion.
We've had discussion. We can start. All in favor of the motion?
It's a negative motion.
All in favor of the negative motion, right?
Could you read the motion for clarity's sake? Please.
And
He's
in
got-
motion.
You did it.
It's in the packet.
Denial motion.
Well, it's in the packet.
It wasn't quite the packet one, but yeah.
Yeah, well, no, you read it right from there.
I started from there. Let me pull it back up. I'm pretty sure I can phrase it.
Approve the denial.
So I move that the conditional use permit for expansion of the Coffin Butte landfill be denied based on evidence in the record and findings and opposition and conclusions developed at the public hearing, including the opening statements by planning commissioners tonight.
Mhm.
So I added that last part of the sentence to the motion that's in the packet.
And I made a second to that motion.
Mhm.
All in favor?
Do we have to do a roll call vote on this, or we just can do it?
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
You entertain an amendment to include the discussion, the subsequent discussion.
Oh, right.
Those 2 words,
As
the opening statement.
long as you're okay, we don't have to have a second on that in our rules, okay, so
Okay.
that is included. Okay. So we'll take oh boy, a roll call vote. We don't need one, do we? I didn't
Okay.
think so,
Okay.
unless we have dissension.
What about Nick?
What?
So correct.
Nick's online.
It's actually not.
Chair Fowler, is he's still online?
Sheriff Fowler, are you still online?
Yes, I'm line, yes.
So we're going to take a vote, okay? All in favor?
And I would suggest it be a roll call vote.
That's funny.
The obviously ineffective chair has been overruled, and we will take a roll call vote.
Easy.
Certainly call us.
We'll start with Sheriff Fowler.
Yes.
Chair Heyman can I abstain?
Oh, well, let me look at the bylaws.
Oh.
For the sake of moving forward, I will vote yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes to deny.
Commissioner Bisco,
Yes.
Commissioner Fulford,
Yes.
Commissioner Struthers,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson.
Yes.
We have an unanimous vote. I now have other things to read.
Yes.
This is the final oral decision of the Benton County Planning Commission. The decision of the Planning Commission becomes final upon the date of the vote of the Planning Commission rendering a decision and adopting written findings of fact and conclusions of law. The Planning Commission will meet at a previously noticed meeting on July 29th, 2025 to adopt the final written decision, including findings of facts and conclusions of law based on the Planning Commission's oral decision tonight. The notice of decision will be mailed to all persons entitled to notice in accordance with Benton County Code 51.625. An appeal of the decision of the Planning Commission to the Board of Commissions shall be filed within 14 calendar days from the date of the final decision adopting findings of fact and conclusions of law. The final decision of the Planning Commission may be appealed to the Benton County Board of County Commissioners within those 14 days of the Planning Commission's final decision adopting the written findings of the fact and the conclusions of law. The fee for appealing the Planning Commission decision in the landfill site zone in Benton County Board of Commissioners is set forth in Board Order D 2023-091. The fee is the actual cost of the county to the county of the appeal with a $5,000 deposit due from the appellant at the date that the appeal is filed. This meeting is now recessed until July 29th, 2025 at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.